The farmer took his horse to the fair, his eyes filled with tears and his heart broken. But before he could sell it, the animal dug something up from the ground, and when they saw what it was, everyone was in shock. Dawn broke reluctantly over Willow Creek, Alabama, spreading pale light across the dilapidated trailer where Elijah Williams slept fitfully. At 23, his lean frame still carried the tension of someone perpetually ready to flee or fight. He woke before his alarm, as always, eyes opening to the cracked ceiling where water stains formed continents of misfortune. Through his window, partially covered by a threadbare curtain, he could see the sprawling Goldstein farm in the distance, white fences and manicured paddocks forming a stark contrast to his own surroundings. Elijah swung his legs over the side of his bed, bare feet connecting with the cool linoleum floor. His morning ritual never varied, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders, splashing cold water on his face, and staring briefly at the reflection that gazed back. Dark eyes holding memories he'd learned to tuck away each morning like folding away nightclothes. The mirror reflected scars, visible and invisible. A thin white line across his right cheekbone, another, thicker, disappearing beneath the collar of his t-shirt. Reminders of foster homes where he'd learned early that his black skin made him both visible and invisible in all the wrong ways. A memory surfaced. Elijah at 12, curled into a ball on a bedroom floor as Mr. Henderson's belt whistled through the air. The burning stripes across his back. His desperate escape when the man finally passed out drunk. Finding sanctuary in the dilapidated barn where an ancient gelding with cloudy eyes had shuffled closer, offering wordless comfort as Elijah sobbed against its warm flank. The first time he'd discovered his unusual connection with horses, how they seemed to settle in his presence, how they recognized in him a kindred wounded spirit. Pushing the memory aside, Elijah dressed quickly in worn jeans and a faded blue work shirt. Today was his first day at Goldstein Farm. Not a job he wanted, but one he needed desperately. The electricity bill was 2 months overdue, and odd jobs around smaller properties had dried up as summer approached. He walked the 3 miles to the farm, not wanting to waste gas in his ancient pickup. The morning was already warm, promising another sweltering Alabama day. As he approached the imposing gates with Goldstein Farm worked into the wrought iron, Elijah straightened his shoulders and erased all expression from his face. The mask he'd perfected in a childhood spent learning which emotions were safe to reveal. The main house loomed ahead, a sprawling colonial revival with gleaming white columns. To its left stretched stables and paddocks housing some of the most expensive horseflesh in the state. Robert Goldstein had made his fortune in Texas oil before retiring to Alabama to play gentleman farmer, collecting champion horses the way other men collected vintage cars. "You're the Williams boy?" A voice like gravel scraped across cement greeted Elijah as he approached the stable office. "Yes, sir. Elijah Williams. I'm here about the stable hand position." Robert Goldstein assessed him from behind a mahogany desk, eyes cold beneath silver brows. In his 60s, he carried himself with the entitled confidence of a man who had always commanded rather than requested. "References say you're good with animals." Goldstein's tone suggested skepticism. "Mason will show you the ropes. Pays $8 an hour, cash weekly. You clean stalls, feed, basic grooming on the gentler stock." His eyes narrowed. "There's one animal you stay clear of, understand? The Appaloosa in the end stall. Thunderbolt. Cost me $40,000 and now he's nothing but a liability. Just clean outside his stall, don't even think about going in. He's already put 3 handlers in the hospital." "Yes, sir. That beast is on borrowed time anyway. After the auction next month he's going to slaughter. Shame to waste good horseflesh, but he's proven unmanageable." Something tightened in Elijah's chest. What happened to him? "Rodeo champion. Previous owner used methods I don't approve of." Goldstein waved dismissively. "Not my problem anymore. Just stay away from him." Mason Reynolds appeared in the doorway, stocky, sunburned, with permanently narrowed eyes. The farm's head wrangler had a reputation for breaking horses and men with equal efficiency. "This the new boy?" Mason's gaze traveled over Elijah with the assessment one might give a tool of questionable quality. "Come on then. Got work piling up." The tour of the stables was brief and perfunctory. Mason pointed out feed rooms, tack storage, and the locations of cleaning equipment, peppering his instructions with thinly veiled comments that made Elijah's heritage sound like a deficiency. "These thoroughbreds cost more than you'll earn in a lifetime, boy. You so much as breathe wrong around them, you're gone." They passed stall after stall of magnificent animals, gleaming coats, intelligent eyes, the aristocracy of the equine world. Then they reached the end stall. Unlike the others, this one had additional bars installed across the top half of the Dutch door. "That's Thunderbolt, devil incarnate." Mason spat on the ground. "Tom Fisher nearly lost his arm trying to examine him last month." Horse went berserk the minute he entered the stall. Elijah caught only a glimpse of movement in the shadows, a flash of spotted coat, the powerful silhouette of a muscular Appaloosa. But even that brief look told him volumes. The animal's posture spoke of constant vigilance, muscles bunched for fight rather than flight. "What happened to him before he came here?" Elijah asked quietly. Mason snorted. "Does it matter? Some animals are just born mean." But Elijah knew better. No horse was born mean. They were made that way. During lunch break, Elijah found himself alone at the edge of the staff picnic table. The other workers, all white, all locals, clustered at the opposite end, their conversation deliberately excluding him. Only Sarah, a young woman who worked in the kitchen, offered a small smile as she passed by with a tray of sandwiches. "Don't mind them," she whispered, sliding an extra sandwich toward him. "They're just set in their ways." In the afternoon, Elijah was assigned to clean the stable corridor. Everyone else had gone to the main house for a staff meeting, leaving him alone with the horses. The silence was peaceful after Mason's constant barrage of instructions and thinly disguised insults. Without conscious thought, Elijah began to hum, a low, melancholy blues tune his grandfather had taught him. "Songs that carried our people through the worst times," the old man had explained. "When your body's in chains, but your soul needs to fly." The melody filled the stable, simple yet profound. As he worked his way down the corridor, Elijah noticed the horses responding, ears pricking forward, some moving closer to their stall doors. He'd always had this effect on animals, this ability to calm them with his voice, his touch, his mere presence. It had been his salvation in foster homes, where humans offered cruelty, but the farm animals offered solace. When he reached Thunderbolt's stall, Elijah expected the usual reaction he'd been warned about: lunging, kicking, aggressive displays. Instead, he found the horse standing motionless in the center of the stall, ears erect and focused intently on him. The animal's eyes, dark, intelligent, wary, fixed on Elijah with an intensity that felt like recognition. Elijah continued humming, moving more slowly now, watching the Appaloosa from his peripheral vision. Thunderbolt's nostrils flared, testing Elijah's scent. His powerful body remained tense, but the aggressive posture had softened almost imperceptibly. "I see you, big man," Elijah murmured, keeping his voice low and melodic. "I see what they did to you." He moved closer to the stall, still at a safe distance but close enough to better observe the magnificent animal. Thunderbolt's coat, once gleaming white with distinctive black spots across his rump, was now dull from stress. Scars marked his flanks, telling stories of spurs dug too deep, of training that crossed into cruelty. "I know how it feels when they use your body for their entertainment," Elijah continued softly. "When they break you because they can't understand you." Something shifted in Thunderbolt's demeanor, the slightest relaxation of his jaw, a barely perceptible lowering of his head. In that moment, Elijah recognized in the horse's eyes the same expression he'd seen in his own reflection countless times in foster homes, the look of a being who had stopped believing in others, whose trust had been beaten out one blow at a time. Moving deliberately, Elijah set down his broom and stepped one pace closer to the stall. Thunderbolt watched him, ears still forward, neither advancing nor retreating. I know that fear that turns to anger because it's the only way to survive, Elijah whispered, extending his hand slowly, still at a safe distance, offering nothing but his presence. To his astonishment, Thunderbolt stretched his neck a few inches toward Elijah's outstretched fingers. They didn't touch, but the gesture, for an animal described as demonic, was extraordinary. The moment shattered at the sound of boots on concrete. Elijah turned to see Mason and several stable hands returning, their loud voices echoing through the previously peaceful space. Mason's eyes narrowed dangerously when he saw Elijah's proximity to Thunderbolt's stall. "Hey boy, get away from that animal before he takes your arm off." His lip curled in contempt. "Or maybe that's what you deserve for not following simple orders." Elijah stepped back wordlessly, retrieving his broom. The other workers snickered, exchanging knowing glances that suggested they'd welcome seeing the new hire put in his place, or better yet, injured severely enough to disappear. As Elijah resumed his tasks, moving further down the corridor, he cast one final glance toward Thunderbolt. The horse remained at the front of his stall, his gaze still fixed on Elijah. But now, instead of the explosive tension that characterized his usual state, there was something else in his posture. A cautious curiosity, perhaps the faintest acknowledgement of recognition between two beings who understood what it meant to be treated as less than. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of physical labor. Elijah kept his head down, his movements efficient, his expression neutral. He'd learned early that invisibility was often his best protection. But his mind kept returning to Thunderbolt, to the scars that mapped the animal's suffering, to the momentary connection they'd shared. When his shift ended, Elijah began the long walk back to his trailer. The setting sun painted the landscape in hues of amber and gold, casting long shadows across fields where generations of men like him had labored, their sweat seeping into soil they would never own. His body ached from the day's work, but it was a familiar pain, almost comforting in its predictability. As he reached the crest of the hill overlooking Goldstein Farm, Elijah paused. In the distance, he could just make out the stable where Thunderbolt was confined, a dark rectangle against the pastoral landscape. Something tightened in his chest, an unfamiliar sense of purpose taking root alongside the constant companion of caution that had kept him alive this long. While returning to his trailer after work, Elijah couldn't forget Thunderbolt's gaze, not the look of a demonic beast, but of a being who, like him, had learned that trust leads to pain. Yet in that brief moment when their eyes met, something dormant in both of them seemed to awaken. Elijah's dreams that night were filled with wild eyes and scarred flanks. He woke before dawn, the memory of Thunderbolt's gaze lingering like a question that demanded answering. Outside his window, the first gray light seeped across the Alabama sky, promising another scorching summer day. He dressed quickly, packed a worn leather satchel with items he'd normally never risk bringing to work, and set out for the Goldstein farm an hour earlier than required. The morning mist still clung to the pastures as Elijah approached the stables, his footsteps silent on the damp ground. He paused at the entrance, listening. No voices, no movement. Just the occasional soft nicker or gentle snort from the horses inside. Perfect. Slipping through the side door, Elijah moved with practiced quietness down the central aisle. Most of the horses stirred at his presence, some nickering in greeting as if they remembered yesterday's songs. He acknowledged each with a soft word, but his destination was clear. The isolated stall at the far end where Thunderbolt was kept. The Appaloosa was awake, standing alert in the center of his stall. His ears pricked forward immediately as Elijah approached, his nostrils flaring to catch the young man's scent. "Morning, big man," Elijah murmured, settling himself on an overturned feed bucket a safe distance from the stall door. "Thought I'd come early. Give us some time without all those eyes watching." From his satchel, Elijah withdrew an object wrapped in a faded bandana, his grandfather's banjo, the only possession of value he owned. The wood was worn smooth from decades of handling, the head patched in places, but the strings were new and carefully tuned. "My grandpa played this every evening after working the fields," Elijah explained, his fingers finding their positions with familiar ease. Said music was the one thing they couldn't take from us, no matter what else they stole. He began to play, softly at first, an old blues melody that seemed to rise from the earth itself, notes hanging in the morning air like the mist outside. Thunderbolt's reaction was subtle but unmistakable. The constant tension in his powerful shoulders eased slightly. His breathing, usually sharp and irregular, found a slower rhythm. Elijah played for 20 minutes, never making demands, never expecting anything from the horse except what was freely given: attention, perhaps curiosity. When he finally set the banjo aside, the quality of silence between them had changed. It was no longer charged with wariness, but had softened into something approaching companionable. "See you later, Thunderbolt," Elijah said, packing away his instrument as the sounds of workers arriving began to filter through the stable doors. "Same time tomorrow." From the window of the stable office, Mason Reynolds watched Elijah's departure with narrowed eyes. His thick fingers drummed against the weathered windowsill, suspicion hardening his features. "What's that boy up to?" he muttered to himself. Throughout the day, Elijah performed his assigned tasks with quiet efficiency, keeping his interactions with the other workers minimal. Only Sarah, bringing lunch to the stable hands, offered genuine warmth. "You're different with them," she observed, nodding toward the stalls as she handed him a sandwich. "The horses, I mean. Everyone else here treats them like machines or trophies." Elijah accepted the food with a nod of thanks. "Horses are like people who've been hurt," he said after a moment. "When you suffer enough, your first reaction to anyone approaching is to attack before they can attack you. It's not meanness, it's survival." Sarah's eyes widened slightly at his insight. "That's why Thunderbolt keeps hurting people?" "He's not hurting people. He's protecting himself the only way he knows how." Elijah glanced toward the end stall. Nobody's ever given him a reason to believe humans mean anything but pain. The following morning, Elijah arrived early again, this time with a dog-eared copy of The Man Who Whispered to Horses, tucked alongside his banjo. After playing several melodies, he opened the book and began reading aloud, his voice a gentle current in the morning stillness. "The horse's fear is never irrational," he read. "What we call bad behavior is almost always a response to prior human failure. Failure to understand, failure to communicate, failure to establish trust." Thunderbolt stood at the front of his stall now, not pressed against the back wall as he had been on Elijah's first day. His ears remained fixed on Elijah's voice, his intelligent eyes tracking every movement. Day by day, Elijah established a pattern. Early mornings with music and quiet conversation. Regular work hours, keeping his head down, performing his tasks with the invisibility he'd perfected in foster homes. Then, when the other workers took their afternoon break at the main house, another stolen moment with Thunderbolt. Sometimes just sitting quietly, sometimes humming softly while completing nearby tasks. "My grandmother used to say that trust is like water on dry land," Elijah told Thunderbolt on the 5th morning, now sitting closer to the stall than he'd initially dared. "Pour it all at once, and it just runs off without sinking in. It needs to fall drop by drop every day, same time, until the earth believes the water will return tomorrow." The breakthrough came unexpectedly during the 2nd week. From the small wild apple tree near his trailer, Elijah had collected several small, tart fruits. During a quiet afternoon moment, he placed one carefully in Thunderbolt's water trough while talking softly about the approaching summer heat. He didn't expect immediate results. This was just another drop of water on dry earth. Elijah moved away, busying himself with sweeping nearby, stealing occasional glances at the stall. Thunderbolt approached the trough cautiously, nostrils flaring at the unfamiliar scent. For long minutes, the horse simply stood there, looking from the apple to Elijah and back again. Then, with deliberate slowness, Thunderbolt lowered his head and took the apple into his mouth. Elijah froze mid-sweep, hardly daring to breathe. He'd expected days, perhaps weeks more, before such a gesture of trust. The emotion that swept through him was so sudden and powerful that his vision blurred with unexpected tears. Turning away to hide his reaction, he whispered, "Good man, Thunderbolt. Good man." That evening, as Elijah walked home, his steps felt lighter despite his physical exhaustion. Something profound had shifted, not just in Thunderbolt but in himself, a fragile hope taking root where resignation had long lived. The next morning brought an unwelcome change to their routine. As Elijah settled onto his bucket with his banjo, Mason's voice cut through the peaceful, stable atmosphere. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Elijah's fingers stilled on the strings as Mason approached, flanked by two other workers who smirked in anticipation of trouble. "Goldstein pays you to clean stalls, not put on concerts," Mason said, eyeing the banjo with contempt. "Or maybe you think you're special, think these animals need your Negro spirituals?" The slur hung in the air. Elijah carefully wrapped his banjo, his face expressionless despite the anger churning beneath his calm exterior. "I was just taking a break before starting work, sir," he said quietly. "Won't happen again." Mason stepped closer, invading Elijah's space with deliberate intimidation. "You know what I think? I think you're wasting time with that devil horse because you're lazy. Or maybe you're planning something, trying to make us look bad when he doesn't kill you." "No, sir. Just doing my job." "Your job is what I say it is." Mason jabbed a finger into Elijah's chest. "And I say stay away from that animal except to clean outside his stall. He's already sent 3 men to the hospital. Men better than you." Elijah nodded, swallowing the retort that burned in his throat. As Mason and his cronies walked away, their laughter echoing through the stables, Elijah glanced at Thunderbolt. The horse had moved to the front of his stall during the confrontation, his posture alert, almost protective. "It's okay, big man," Elijah murmured when the men were out of earshot. "I'm not going anywhere." Later that week, Robert Goldstein himself made a rare appearance in the stables during afternoon feeding time. He paused when he saw Elijah carefully dividing his own modest lunch, offering bits of apple to several horses. "I don't recall authorizing treats for the stock," Goldstein said, his tone suggesting he'd caught Elijah stealing rather than sharing his own food. Elijah straightened immediately. "Just from my lunch, sir. I thought—" "That's precisely the problem," Goldstein interrupted. "I don't pay you to think. I pay you for hours of work, not for a circus show." His cold gaze swept over the stable, lingering on Thunderbolt's stall where the Appaloosa watched the interaction intently. "If you can't follow simple instructions, there are dozens of others waiting for this job." The threat was clear. Elijah nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "Yes, sir. I understand." Despite the warnings, Elijah continued his quiet communion with Thunderbolt, though now with greater caution. He arrived even earlier, varied his routine to avoid predictability, and kept his banjo hidden beneath straw in an unused tack room. The relationship between man and horse deepened through these stolen moments, Thunderbolt now greeting Elijah with soft, nickering sounds, accepting apples directly from the water trough, gradually allowing Elijah to move his seat closer to the stall door. 3 weeks into this delicate dance, Elijah noticed a significant change. When he approached Thunderbolt's stall, the horse no longer showed signs of anxiety or aggression. Instead, his ears would prick forward in what could only be described as anticipation. One particularly quiet afternoon, Elijah took a risk. Instead of placing the apple in the water trough, he held it flat on his palm and extended his arm through the lower half of the Dutch door. Not forcing contact, simply offering the possibility. Time seemed to suspend itself as Thunderbolt regarded first the apple, then Elijah's face, with deep consideration. The moment stretched, taut with potential energy. Then, with exquisite gentleness, the massive animal stepped forward and took the fruit from Elijah's hand, his lips soft against the young man's palm. Elijah remained motionless, tears streaming silently down his face at this profound demonstration of trust. No one else witnessed this moment, this victory born of patience and respect rather than dominance and force. The following day, as Elijah returned from lunch, Sarah caught up with him near the feed room, her expression animated with excitement. "Did you hear?" Emma Goldstein is coming home tomorrow. Mr. Goldstein's granddaughter, she whispered. She's studying veterinary medicine at the university. Everyone says she's nothing like her grandfather. She actually cares about the animals' welfare, not just their price tags. Elijah absorbed this information with cautious interest. Is she staying long? All summer. Her internship at the university clinic just ended. Sarah glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. I've heard she's writing her thesis on rehabilitating traumatized horses. Maybe she could help with Thunderbolt? The possibility ignited a spark of hope that Elijah had not allowed himself to consider. An ally with both knowledge and authority, someone who might understand what he was trying to accomplish with Thunderbolt. When Elijah finally returned to his trailer that night, a gentle rain had begun to fall, tapping softly against his metal roof. He stood for a moment in the doorway, watching the silvery curtain descend over the fields, and smiled up at the sky. Tomorrow was the day Emma Goldstein, Robert's granddaughter and veterinary student, would return to the farm for summer break. And rumors said that, unlike her grandfather, she had a heart that truly cared about animal suffering. The next morning, as Elijah approached the Goldstein farm, the air felt different somehow, charged with possibility. A sleek blue Prius with university parking stickers plastered across its bumper sat in the circular driveway, standing out among the farm's work trucks and Robert Goldstein's luxury SUV. The contrast struck Elijah as fitting, a symbol of the two worlds about to collide. He slipped into the stables through the side entrance as usual, eager for his morning ritual with Thunderbolt before the workday officially began. The Appaloosa greeted him with a soft nicker, moving immediately to the front of the stall, a far cry from the aggressive stance he'd maintained just weeks ago. "Morning, big man," Elijah murmured, placing an apple in the feed bucket. "We might have company today." As if summoned by his words, the stable door creaked open. Elijah quickly moved away from Thunderbolt's stall, grabbing a pitchfork to appear occupied with routine chores. But instead of Mason's intimidating bulk, a young woman stepped into the diffused morning light. Emma Goldstein looked nothing like her grandfather. Where Robert projected cold authority, Emma radiated a warm curiosity. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her clothes simple, jeans, boots, and a University of Alabama Veterinary Sciences t-shirt. No jewelry except for a simple watch and a bracelet made of braided leather. She hesitated at the entrance, allowing her eyes to adjust to the dimmer light inside the stables. When she noticed Elijah, surprise flickered across her features, quickly replaced by friendly interest. "Hi there," she called, walking toward him. "I didn't expect anyone to be here so early." Elijah nodded respectfully, keeping his expression neutral. "Just getting an early start, ma'am." "Emma," she corrected immediately, extending her hand. "Emma Goldstein. And you are?" The gesture, so simple yet so unusual from a Goldstein to someone in his position, momentarily stunned him. "Elijah Williams," he replied, briefly accepting her handshake. Emma glanced around the stables, her gaze lingering on each horse with professional assessment. "My grandfather mentioned a new hire. You've been here, 3 weeks now?" "Yes, Ma." "Emma." Her attention shifted to Thunderbolt's stall, and her expression grew more serious. "And that's the infamous Thunderbolt, I presume?" She moved closer to the stall, maintaining a respectful distance. "Grandfather says he's unmanageable. Scheduled for slaughter after the auction." Something in her tone, a note of skepticism, perhaps even challenge, made Elijah look more closely at her. There was no fear in her stance as she observed Thunderbolt, only thoughtful consideration. "He's been through a lot," Elijah said carefully. Emma turned to him with sudden intensity. "What makes you say that?" Elijah hesitated, weighing his words. "Just observation, ma'am. His scarring suggests rough handling, and his reactions, they're defensive, not aggressive." Interesting distinction. Emma studied him now instead of the horse. Most people don't recognize the difference. Before Elijah could respond, the main doors swung open, and Robert Goldstein strode in, his presence immediately filling the space. His face brightened upon seeing his granddaughter, though his smile dimmed slightly when he noticed Elijah. "Emma, darling," he exclaimed, embracing her. "I thought you were still sleeping off that long drive." "Couldn't wait to see the horses," Emma replied, returning his hug with genuine affection, despite their obvious differences. "Especially after what you told me about Thunderbolt." Robert's expression soured. "That beast is a lost cause, I'm afraid, even with your expertise." He glanced dismissively at Elijah. "Williams, the south paddock fences need checking. Mason will show you what needs repair." The dismissal was clear. Elijah nodded and left without comment, though he felt Emma's curious gaze following him. Throughout the day, Elijah caught glimpses of Emma as she toured the property with her grandfather. Their animated conversation suggested disagreement, particularly when they stood near Thunderbolt's stall. Even from a distance, Elijah could read the tension in their body language, Robert's dismissive gestures contrasting with Emma's passionate intensity. That evening, after most workers had departed, Elijah remained to complete some final tasks. As he swept the central aisle of the stables, a movement near Thunderbolt's stall caught his attention. Emma stood partially concealed behind a support post, camera in hand, photographing Elijah's interaction with the horses. When their eyes met, she straightened, not embarrassed at being caught but seemingly making a decision. She approached directly. "Why do you care about a horse everyone else has written off?" she asked without preamble. The directness of her question deserved honesty, "Because I know what it's like when everyone decides you're not worth the effort." Something in his answer resonated with her. Emma glanced toward Thunderbolt, then back to Elijah. "I've been watching you with him. You're doing everything right. The quiet approach, no pressure, consistent presence. Textbook trauma rehabilitation, except I don't think you learned it from any textbook." Elijah remained silent, uncertain where this conversation was leading. Emma lowered her voice. "My grandfather is planning to sell him for slaughter after the auction next month. Unless," she hesitated, "unless we can prove he has value. Not because my grandfather suddenly cares about animal welfare, but because a rehabilitated Appaloosa with Thunderbolt's bloodlines would be worth far more alive than dead." "We?" Elijah questioned. Emma smiled slightly. "I'm writing my thesis on equine trauma recovery. What you're doing with Thunderbolt, it's exactly the methodology I've been researching, but I've never seen it implemented so intuitively." She reached into her backpack and withdrew several books. "These are from Australia. Revolutionary approaches to rehabilitating horses with severe trauma histories. They confirm everything you've been doing instinctively." Elijah accepted the books with careful hands, recognizing their value both as knowledge and as an unexpected alliance. "I can help," Emma continued. "Provide supplements to improve his physical condition, document his progress scientifically. But I need your connection with him. My grandfather respects data and profit margins. If we can show Thunderbolt's potential value, he might reconsider." The unexpected "we" hung between them, a bridge across worlds that rarely intersected as equals. "Why are you doing this?" Elijah asked, the question he couldn't hold back. Emma's expression softened. "Because animals deserve advocates. And because I've spent my whole life watching my grandfather value things only for their monetary worth. Just once, I'd like to show him there's another way to measure value." Their unlikely partnership took shape over the following days. Emma provided specialized knowledge and supplements, while Elijah continued his gentle, consistent approach with Thunderbolt. She documented their interactions discreetly, building evidence for her thesis and for the eventual confrontation with her grandfather. "I don't really understand how you do it," Emma admitted one afternoon, watching Elijah sit quietly near Thunderbolt's stall. The horse relaxed in his presence. "The theories explain the methodology, but there's something more with you." Elijah considered her question seriously. "My grandmother taught me before she died. She said animals read your intentions before you even open your mouth. I just feel what he needs. Can't explain it better than that." Emma nodded, making notes in her journal. Intuitive empathetic response. The Australian research calls it joining up at a deeper level than just behavioral conditioning. A week into their collaboration, nature intervened dramatically. A violent summer storm descended on Willow Creek, turning afternoon to eerie twilight as lightning slashed across the darkened sky. The first thunderclap hit like an explosion, making the stable walls shudder. The effect on the horses was immediate. Nervous whinnies and the sound of hooves against wood echoed through the building. But from Thunderbolt's stall came sounds of pure terror, powerful impacts as the horse threw himself against the walls, high-pitched screams of an animal in the grip of flashback trauma. Sarah, who had been helping distribute feed, grabbed Elijah's arm in panic. "He's going to hurt himself. What do we do?" Emma rushed in from the main house, rain-soaked and breathless. "It's the thunder. Must be triggering memories from the rodeo. They often used fireworks and loud sounds to make the Broncos more exciting for the crowd." Another thunderclap boomed directly overhead. Thunderbolt's response was devastating. A series of kicks so powerful they splintered part of his stall door. "We need to sedate him," Emma said, already reaching for her medical bag. "No," Elijah countered quietly. "That's what everyone's always done. Force him into submission when he's terrified. It only teaches him that humans make the fear worse." Before either woman could stop him, Elijah moved toward Thunderbolt's stall. The horse was in full panic now, whites showing around his eyes, foam flecking his mouth, his powerful body slick with sweat as he crashed against the confines of his stall. "Elijah, don't!" Sarah cried. "He'll kill you in that state." But Elijah's focus had narrowed to the terrified animal. Slowly, with deliberate movements, he unlatched the lower half of the Dutch door. "What are you doing?" Emma whispered, horrified, yet fascinated. "Giving him a choice," Elijah replied, and stepped into the stall. Time seemed to slow. Thunderbolt reared up, his massive forelegs pawing the air dangerously close to Elijah's head. Sarah covered her eyes, certain she was about to witness a tragedy. But Elijah remained perfectly still, his voice a steady, gentle current beneath the storm's violence. "I'm here, partner. I'm here. The noise can't hurt you now. I'm here." The words became a mantra, repeated in the same calm cadence regardless of Thunderbolt's frantic movements. Elijah made no attempt to touch or restrain the horse. He simply existed in the space, offering his presence as anchor in the animal's storm of fear. For one terrible moment, as another thunderclap shook the building, Thunderbolt's panic seemed to crescendo. He reared again, his hooves dangerously close to crushing Elijah's skull. Sarah gasped, certain disaster was imminent. But then something extraordinary happened. As the thunder's echo faded, Thunderbolt lowered himself to all fours and instead of retreating to the far corner or attacking, moved tentatively toward Elijah. His nostrils flared, taking in the young man's familiar scent. With exquisite gentleness, the massive animal pressed his muzzle against Elijah's shoulder, not seeking restraint, but connection. Emma watched in astonishment as Elijah slowly raised his hand to Thunderbolt's neck, stroking the sweat-soaked coat with tender movements. The horse trembled, but did not pull away. With each stroke, each softly murmured reassurance, the trembling lessened. Throughout the night, as the storm raged outside, Elijah remained in Thunderbolt's stall. He sat in the corner on a small mound of clean straw, sometimes singing softly, sometimes silent, always present. The horse moved between nervous pacing and periods of stillness, gradually spending more time standing near Elijah, drawing comfort from his unwavering presence. By dawn, when the storm had passed and the first pearl-gray light filtered through the stable windows, both man and horse had exhausted themselves into a state of peaceful coexistence. Elijah dozed in his corner, head tilted back against the wall. Thunderbolt stood nearby, one hind leg relaxed, his head lowered in the equine posture of trust and rest. This was the tableau that Mason discovered when he arrived to begin the morning feeding. His shout of astonishment echoed through the stables. "What in God's name?" The commotion roused Elijah from his light sleep. He blinked, momentarily disoriented, then realized where he was, and that Thunderbolt remained calm despite Mason's abrupt entrance. The horse had positioned himself between Elijah and the perceived threat, not aggressively but protectively. "Get out of there right now before that devil kills you," Mason ordered, his face flushed with anger and something else. Perhaps fear that his predictions about the horse had been proven wrong. Elijah rose slowly, placing a reassuring hand on Thunderbolt's flank before moving toward the stall door. The horse followed his movement with alert eyes but made no aggressive gestures. "I'll be back," Elijah promised softly before exiting the stall. Mason immediately secured the door, shaking his head in disbelief. "I'm telling Mr. Goldstein about this. You deliberately disobeyed direct orders about that animal." But as Mason stormed off to report the incident, Elijah noticed he wasn't alone. Emma stood a few stalls away, her expression a mixture of amazement and scientific curiosity. She'd witnessed the entire exchange, and from the camera half hidden in her hand, had documented it as well. By mid-morning, the news had spread through the small community of Willow Creek. The young Negro horse whisperer had spent the night in the stall of the demon horse and lived to tell the tale. The caretaker ran to find witnesses, and soon the news spread throughout the little community of Willow Creek. The young Negro had enchanted the demonic horse, and Robert Goldstein immediately realized there might be money to be made from this miracle. By the time the sun reached its zenith that day, a steady stream of curious onlookers had begun to appear at the Goldstein farm gates. Word spread through Willow Creek with the efficiency that only small towns can manage. The dangerous Appaloosa that had hospitalized 3 men had somehow been tamed by the young black stable hand. The story grew with each retelling, embellished with details of mystical abilities and secret knowledge. Robert Goldstein, initially furious at Elijah's disobedience, quickly recognized an opportunity. By afternoon, he had stationed one of the farmhands at the entrance with a makeshift sign, "See the miracle horse and his trainer, $5 admission." Elijah watched this development with quiet dismay. The last thing Thunderbolt needed was to become a spectacle. The horse had made tremendous progress, but his trust remained fragile, built on the foundation of quiet consistency that crowds would inevitably disrupt. "This isn't right," he murmured to Sarah as they watched another group of visitors being led toward the stables. "He's not a sideshow attraction." Sarah nodded sympathetically. "Mr. Goldstein sees dollar signs, not a recovering animal. But maybe you can use this somehow. If people see how special Thunderbolt is, they might care about what happens to him." Elijah considered her words as he made his way to Thunderbolt's stall, positioning himself protectively between the curious onlookers and the increasingly agitated horse. The Appaloosa's ears flattened at the approach of strangers, his muscles tensing beneath his spotted coat. "He doesn't like the attention," Elijah explained to the disappointed spectators who had hoped to see the miracle up close. "He's still healing." A heavy-set man in an expensive cowboy hat, all show and no ranch, scoffed loudly. "We paid good money to see something. Make him do a trick or something." "He's not a circus animal," Elijah replied evenly, though his hands clenched at his sides. "He's a survivor learning to trust again." The confrontation might have escalated if not for Robert Goldstein's timely appearance. He smoothly directed the visitors to other attractions on the farm, promising them a proper demonstration once the horse's training is complete. When the group dispersed, Goldstein turned to Elijah, his smile never reaching his eyes. "You should be thanking me, boy. I'm making you famous." He patted his pocket where bills were neatly folded, "and making us both some money in the process." Elijah watched the older man count his earnings, a cold realization settling in his stomach. To Goldstein, Thunderbolt's recovery wasn't a miracle of patience and trust. It was a marketable commodity, a new attraction to exploit until something more profitable came along. Later that evening, after the last visitors had departed, Emma found Elijah in Thunderbolt's stall, gently examining a patch of irritated skin where the horse had rubbed anxiously against the wall during the day's commotion. "I found something you should see," she said without preamble, her expression grave. "It's about Thunderbolt's past." In the privacy of the feed room, Emma unfolded several papers she'd printed from the university library's archives. Photographs and newspaper clippings documented Thunderbolt's career in the rodeo circuit. Images of a younger, more vibrant animal bucking violently while a rider clung to his back. Look at this. Emma pointed to a particular series of images. See the difference in his eye from the early competitions to the later ones? Elijah studied the photographs carefully. The transformation was unmistakable. From the alert, powerful gaze of a young stallion to the wild-eyed panic of an animal pushed beyond endurance. And these are veterinary reports, Emma continued, revealing documents with official letterheads. Filed and ignored, multiple citations for illegal methods, but the owner paid the fines and kept competing. Elijah's fingers traced over the clinical language that documented Thunderbolt's suffering. Subject exhibits signs of extreme stress, evidence of electric prod usage, excessive spurring resulting in tissue damage. This wasn't just rough handling, Emma said softly. It was systematic torture disguised as training. They used increasingly painful methods to make him buck more dramatically for the crowd. Electric shocks, blinding lights, even chemical irritants. Elijah closed his eyes briefly, the documents confirming what he'd already intuited from Thunderbolt's behavior. No wonder he doesn't trust humans. I confronted my grandfather with these, Emma said, gathering the papers. Asked if he knew about this history when he bought Thunderbolt. He dismissed it as standard practices in the industry and reminded me that horses are livestock, not pets. The conversation was interrupted by Sarah, who appeared at the feed room door with uncharacteristic excitement. Elijah, there's someone here to see you, an older gentleman. Says his name is Willard Jenkins. Outside the stables, Elijah found a dignified black man in his 70s, leaning on a polished wooden cane. His clothes were modest but impeccably maintained, and his eyes, sharp beneath gray brows, held the quiet wisdom of someone who had witnessed history firsthand. Mr. Jenkins, Elijah greeted him respectfully, recognizing the name from community gatherings he'd occasionally attended. Young Williams, the elder replied, his deep voice carrying the rhythmic cadence of the rural South. I've been hearing stories about you and a certain troubled horse. His gaze shifted to the stables behind Elijah. Thought I should see for myself if Josephine's grandson inherited her gift. Elijah stared at the older man in shock. You knew my grandmother? Jenkins smiled, revealing a gap between his front teeth. Knew her? Boy, Josephine Williams had healing hands that could calm a tornado. Folks from 3 counties would bring their sick animals to her when vets had given up. The revelation struck Elijah like a physical blow. His memories of his grandmother were precious, but fragmentary. She had died when he was 8, shortly after his brief time in her care and before the foster system claimed him. He remembered her hands, gentle on his shoulders, and her voice singing old spirituals as twilight settled, but little else. I didn't know, he admitted. No one ever told me much about her. Jenkins nodded sadly. Not surprising. Folks with power don't like remembering people who challenge their notions of who should have gifts and knowledge. He reached into his worn leather satchel and withdrew a photograph, its edges yellowed with age. Thought you might want to see this. The photograph showed a younger Josephine Williams standing proudly beside a magnificent black horse. Her hand rested on the animal's neck with comfortable familiarity, and her smile held the same quiet confidence that Elijah sometimes glimpsed in his own reflection. That was Thunder, Jenkins explained. Meanest stallion in the county until your grandmother got hold of him. After 3 days with her, that horse followed her around like a puppy. Elijah traced his grandmother's face with a gentle finger, hunger for connection tightening his throat. Thank you for this. Jenkins reclaimed the photograph carefully. There's more you should know, son, about this land. He gestured broadly at the expanse of the Goldstein farm. Before the Goldsteins, before the family that sold it to them, this place had another name. Folks called it Freedom Land, established by former slaves after the Civil War. The revelation hung in the air between them as Jenkins continued, his voice lowered as if the very soil might be listening. Your great-great-grandfather built the first proper house on that rise over there, before the agreements began. Agreements? Elijah questioned. Jenkins' expression darkened. That's what they called it when they came with torches and rifles in the night, when they brought papers for folks who couldn't read to sign away their birthrights. He tapped his cane emphatically against the ground. This land has history that Goldstein's money can't erase, though Lord knows they've tried. As the setting sun cast long shadows across the property, Jenkins shared stories that had been passed through generations, tales of a thriving community of free black farmers and craftspeople who had built homes, a school, and even a small church on what was now Goldstein land. He spoke of how, during the backlash against Reconstruction, white landowners had systematically intimidated, threatened, and legally maneuvered to push them off their rightfully owned property. "Your family held out longer than most," Jenkins said. "The Williams were always stubborn folk, had a gift with growing things and healing animals that made them valuable even to those who hated them. But by the turn of the century, they'd been pushed to the edges of what was once their own land." Later that evening, Elijah shared Jenkins's revelations with Emma as they sat on overturned feed buckets outside Thunderbolt's stall. The horse had moved closer to the door as they spoke, his ears pricked forward as if following their conversation. "Do you think my grandfather knows this history?" Emma asked, visibly disturbed by the implications. "Does it matter?" Elijah replied. "Even if he did, it wouldn't change how he sees the land now, as something to be owned and exploited, not a place with history and meaning." Emma was silent for a long moment, processing this perspective. "It should matter," she finally said. "History always matters, especially the parts people try to erase." As their conversation continued, Elijah absently mentioned his grandmother's name, Josephine, while recounting one of Jenkins's stories. To their astonishment, Thunderbolt's head jerked up at the name, his attention suddenly fixed on Elijah with uncanny intensity. "Did you see that?" Emma whispered. "He reacted to your grandmother's name." Elijah repeated softly, "Josephine." And again, Thunderbolt's ears pricked forward, his nostrils flaring as if searching for a scent from the distant past. "It's probably just coincidence," Elijah said, though something deeper than rational thought suggested otherwise, as if something ancestral echoed in the air between them, a connection that transcended ordinary understanding. That night, unable to sleep despite his physical exhaustion, Elijah retrieved his grandfather's old banjo from beneath his bed. As he tuned the strings by the dim light of his bedside lamp, his fingers discovered a loose piece in the instrument's wooden back. Curious, he pried it open carefully and found a small hidden compartment containing a tarnished metal medallion on a leather cord. The medallion bore intricate engravings, symbols he didn't recognize surrounding a central design that resembled a horse in mid-gallop. Something about it felt immediately, inexplicably familiar, as if his fingers had held it before in some forgotten time. The next morning, Elijah showed the medallion to Willard Jenkins, who examined it with trembling fingers, his expression shifting from surprise to reverence. "Where did you find this?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Hidden in my grandfather's banjo. What is it?" Jenkins turned the medallion over, revealing more engravings on the reverse side. "This belonged to your family for generations. It's a freedom token, carried by your ancestors from Africa, hidden during slavery, passed down as reminder of who they were before chains." His weathered finger traced the horse design. The Williams were horse healers back in Africa too. Some traditions run deeper than memory. Elijah stared at the ancient object, feeling the weight of its history, his history, in his palm. Suddenly, the connection he felt with Thunderbolt, the intuitive understanding that had guided his approach, took on new meaning. "This isn't coincidence, son," Jenkins murmured, touching the medallion with reverent fingers. "Some call it fate, others divine justice. But you and this horse are here for a purpose greater than any of us can fully comprehend right now." The medallion felt warm against Elijah's palm, as though the countless hands that had held it before, his ancestors, his bloodline, had somehow imbued the metal with their collective memory. He carefully tucked it into his pocket, the weight of its history a comfort against his thigh as he made his way to the Goldstein farm for another day of work. The atmosphere at the stables had shifted noticeably over the past few days. Workers who had previously avoided Elijah now watched him with a mixture of wariness and grudging respect. Thunderbolt's transformation from demon horse to devoted companion had challenged their assumptions, creating uncomfortable questions about what else they might have been wrong about. Elijah had just finished the morning feeding when Mason appeared at the stable entrance, his expression unusually smug. "Office. Now, boss wants to see you." The walk to the main house felt longer than usual. Elijah's mind raced with possibilities. Perhaps Goldstein had discovered his early morning sessions with Thunderbolt, or maybe Jenkins' visit had raised suspicions about their conversations regarding the land's history. The office where Robert Goldstein conducted his business reflected the man himself, ostentatious wealth masquerading as taste. Dark mahogany furniture gleamed beneath trophy photos of prize-winning horses. A crystal decanter of amber liquor sat on a silver tray, though it was barely 9 in the morning. Goldstein was not alone. Emma sat in one of the leather chairs, her posture stiff with barely contained tension. Next to her stood a man Elijah didn't recognize, tall and weathered, with the calloused hands and calculating eyes of someone who had spent a lifetime bending animals to his will. "Williams," Goldstein gestured toward the remaining chair, not bothering to rise. "I've been thinking about our situation with Thunderbolt." Elijah remained standing, instinctively wary of the scenario unfolding before him. "Sir, your work with that animal has been unexpected." Goldstein sipped his drink, watching Elijah over the rim of the glass. "I've decided to make a change to our plans." The cold knot in Elijah's stomach tightened. "What kind of change, sir?" "Instead of sending Thunderbolt to slaughter after the auction next month, we're going to feature him as the main attraction." Goldstein's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The horse that couldn't be tamed, until now. We'll showcase your methods, demonstrate his rehabilitation, and then auction him to the highest bidder." The proposal hit Elijah like a physical blow. Thunderbolt, finally beginning to heal, would be thrust into the spotlight for entertainment, then sold to someone who might not understand or respect his delicate psychological state. "Mr. Goldstein," Elijah began carefully, "Thunderbolt is still recovering. He trusts me, but he's not ready for public performances or to be separated." "Listen carefully, boy," Goldstein interrupted, the facade of cordiality vanishing instantly. "That horse belongs to me. You are just a temporary employee who can be replaced with a snap of my fingers. If you don't want to participate in the demonstration, there are others who will." The threat hung in the air, its implications crystal clear. Elijah glanced at Emma, whose face had paled during her grandfather's speech. Her slight headshake warned him against further argument. "I understand, sir," Elijah replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "Good." Goldstein gestured to the stranger. "This is Buck Harrington. He's a renowned trainer who specializes in preparing horses for exhibition. He'll be taking over Thunderbolt's final preparations for the auction." Harrington stepped forward, extending a hand that Elijah reluctantly shook. The man's grip was crushing, deliberate. "Heard a lot about your special connection with that Appaloosa," Harrington drawled. "Impressive for an amateur, but auction horses need professional handling, consistency, discipline, respect for hierarchy." Elijah recognized the thinly veiled condescension, the implication that his methods were somehow less valid because they lacked formal credentials, or perhaps because of who was implementing them. "Thunderbolt responds to patience and trust," Elijah stated, meeting Harrington's gaze directly. "Conventional training methods failed with him before." Harrington's smile tightened. "Every horse has its breaking point, son. Some just take more convincing than others." After the meeting, Emma caught up with Elijah outside the stables, her face flushed with anger. "I tried to talk him out of it. Told him Thunderbolt has a specific connection to you that can't be replicated." "What did he say?" Emma's expression darkened. "Connection?" She mimicked her grandfather's dismissive tone. "It's just an animal conditioned to a specific handler. With proper methods and enough force, any horse can be broken." The word broken echoed between them, its violence undisguised. "He doesn't understand what he's risking," Elijah said quietly. "Thunderbolt isn't just shy or stubborn. He's traumatized. Forcing him to perform will undo everything we've accomplished. Grandfather doesn't care about the horse's well-being, Emma replied bitterly. He only sees dollar signs. A rehabilitated Appaloosa with Thunderbolt's lineage could sell for $50,000 or more. Harrington arrived the following morning with a trailer full of equipment that made Elijah's stomach turn. Severe bits, spurs with pointed rowels, and various restraints designed to force compliance rather than invite cooperation. 2 assistants unloaded the gear with practiced efficiency, setting up near Thunderbolt's stall like an invasion force establishing a beachhead. First, we demonstrate what we've accomplished so far, Elijah explained, leading Thunderbolt from his stall using only a loose lead rope. The horse moved beside him calmly, their steps synchronized in a dance of mutual trust. Harrington watched with arms crossed, expression unimpressed. Nice parlor trick, but for a show, we need guarantees, predictable responses to specific cues. His trust is still fragile, Elijah cautioned. Pushing too hard too fast will— Step aside, boy, Harrington interrupted, signaling his assistance. Your methods might work for daily handling, but auction horses need polish. They need a master, not a friend. What followed was brutal to witness. Harrington and his team attempted to outfit Thunderbolt with their training equipment, a process that immediately triggered the horse's defensive instincts. The Appaloosa's eyes widened in terror as they approached with unfamiliar tack, his body tensing as memories of past abuse surfaced. When one assistant attempted to force a severe bit into Thunderbolt's mouth, the horse reacted explosively, rearing and striking out with precision born of fear. The man barely dodged the hooves that could have shattered his skull. His partner wasn't as fortunate, receiving a glancing blow to his shoulder that sent him sprawling across the stable floor. Harrington himself narrowly escaped being crushed against the stall wall, rolling away from Thunderbolt's powerful hindquarters with seconds to spare. The horse now stood trembling in the corner of his stall, eyes wild, nostrils flared, every muscle coiled for fight or flight. You see, Elijah cried out to Goldstein, who had been observing from a safe distance. You're destroying months of progress in minutes. Goldstein's face remained impassive, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. What I'm seeing is an animal that needs to learn who's in charge, he replied coldly. Harrington has a week to prepare him. If he can't manage it, we return to the original plan. Slaughter. The ultimatum left Elijah reeling. In 1 week, Thunderbolt would either be forced into submission, breaking his spirit in the process, or sent to death. Neither option was acceptable. That evening, after tending to Thunderbolt's fresh injuries from the disastrous training session, Elijah sought out Dr. Thompson, the local veterinarian who occasionally treated the Goldstein horses. The older man listened gravely to Elijah's account of the situation. I've seen Harrington's methods before, Thompson said, cleaning his glasses thoughtfully. Effective for creating showy performance horses quickly, but at significant psychological cost to the animals. What you're describing with Thunderbolt, the trust you've built, that's actual rehabilitation. I'd be willing to document the difference professionally. This small offer of support kindled something in Elijah, a realization that he might not be as powerless as Goldstein wanted him to believe. In the kitchen, Sarah listened to Elijah's predicament while preparing staff meals. Most of the workers here have seen how Thunderbolt changed with you, she said, kneading dough with flour-covered hands. Even the ones who won't admit it openly. I could talk to them, see who might stand with you. Emma, meanwhile, activated her university connections. My professor specializes in equine behavior research, she told Elijah while they examined Thunderbolt's new injuries. He's horrified by what I've described. He's willing to come observe and document Harrington's methods. They likely violate several animal welfare statutes. As word spread through Willow Creek's small community about the situation at Goldstein Farm, Elijah found allies emerging from unexpected quarters. Jenkins brought elders from the black community, who remembered stories of Josephine Williams and her special way with troubled animals. They offered their presence and moral support, understanding the significance of Elijah reclaiming not just Thunderbolt's dignity, but a piece of his own heritage. With only 3 days remaining before the auction, Harrington scheduled what he called a final conditioning session. a euphemism that everyone understood meant escalating force until Thunderbolt submitted. As the trainer and his assistants approached the stables with their equipment, they found an unexpected sight. A small crowd gathered outside Thunderbolt's stall. Dr. Thompson stood at the front beside Emma and a distinguished older man she introduced as Professor Martinez from the university's veterinary program. Several stable hands lingered nearby, not openly defiant, but clearly uncomfortable with what was about to occur. "What is this?" Harrington demanded, gesturing at the gathering. "Witnesses," Emma replied calmly, "and documentation." She held up her phone, its camera already recording. "The methods you're employing constitute animal cruelty under state law," Professor Martinez stated, his academic authority lending weight to the accusation. "We have sufficient evidence for a formal complaint to the State Animal Welfare Board." Harrington turned to Goldstein, who had arrived to observe the confrontation. "You're going to let these bleeding hearts interfere with your business?" Goldstein's expression remained carefully neutral, but Elijah could see the calculations happening behind his eyes, weighing potential negative publicity against the profit from Thunderbolt's sale. "Perhaps we should reconsider our approach," Goldstein finally said, his tone measured. "Temporarily suspend the more intensive training methods." It was a tactical retreat, not a surrender. As the crowd dispersed, Goldstein pulled Elijah aside, his grip painfully tight on the younger man's arm. "The auction proceeds as planned," he hissed. "You will demonstrate Thunderbolt's rehabilitation yourself. When he performs perfectly, I profit. If he injures anyone, the responsibility falls entirely on you." His smile was venomous. "And if you refuse to present him, consider yourself immediately terminated, with references that will ensure you never work with horses again in this state." That night, as a gentle rain pattered against the stable roof, Elijah sat in Thunderbolt's stall, the horse's massive head resting trustingly against his shoulder. The animal's breathing was deep and regular, a stark contrast to Elijah's own troubled thoughts. "I don't know how to protect you from what's coming, partner," he whispered, stroking the velvet muzzle. "But I promise you won't ever be treated that way again." Outside the stable, lightning briefly illuminated the rolling fields of what had once been called Freedom Land, acres that had sustained generations of Elijah's ancestors before being stolen through violence and deceit. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, fighting for the freedom of another being on the very land where his family's freedom had been systematically destroyed. He felt the medallion in his pocket, its ancient engravings a tangible connection to those who had come before him. They too had faced impossible choices, systems designed to break them, yet somehow, something essential had survived, passed down through blood and bone and memory to reach him here, now, when another soul needed protection. That night, while cleaning Thunderbolt's wounds from the harsh training session, Elijah made a decision that he would never have considered before. With tears in his eyes, he whispered into the animal's ear, "I won't let them hurt you again, partner, even if it means we have to run away from here together." The medallion felt cool against Elijah's palm as he slipped it back into his pocket, its weight an anchor connecting him to a heritage he was only beginning to understand. The desperation of his whispered promise to Thunderbolt hung in the air between them. Escape seemed simultaneously impossible, and the only moral choice. Morning brought no clarity, only the certainty that time was running out. With only 6 days until the auction, Elijah needed allies and a plan. His first stop was the small veterinary clinic on the outskirts of Willow Creek, where Dr. Thompson was examining a farmer's collie. "Give me a few minutes," the older man said, noting Elijah's expression. After finishing with his patient, he led Elijah to his cluttered office, the walls lined with faded diplomas and photographs of animals he'd treated over his 40-year career. Elijah placed his phone on the desk, showing images of Thunderbolt's fresh injuries from Harrington's training sessions. "They're calling this preparation for the auction, but it's torture." Dr. Thompson examined the photos, his weathered face hardening. Lacerations from improper bit use, bruising consistent with excessive restraint. This constitutes abuse under Alabama's animal protection statutes. He looked up, removing his glasses. These methods haven't been considered acceptable practice for decades. Will you help me document it officially? Make a formal complaint? The veterinarian hesitated only briefly. Goldstein has influence in this county. Standing against him could affect my practice. He straightened in his chair, resolve settling across his features. But I took an oath to prevent animal suffering. I'll examine Thunderbolt myself and file the report. Elijah's next stop was the employee housing behind the main stables. Sarah had just finished her morning shift in the kitchen and sat with him on the rickety steps of the communal porch, her voice low to avoid being overheard. "I've been talking to the others," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Most are scared of losing their jobs, but they're also uncomfortable with what's happening. Miguel and Darnell from the South Pasture crew said they'd stand with you if others do. Even old Jim from maintenance mentioned how that ain't right what they're doing to that horse." "We need to show them they're not alone," Elijah replied, watching workers cross the yard toward the dining hall. "Harrington's methods aren't just cruel to Thunderbolt, they're dangerous for everyone. 3 handlers already hospitalized before I came. How many more injuries before someone admits this approach doesn't work?" Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "There's a staff meeting tomorrow morning. Maybe that's when we should speak up, together." That afternoon, Emma arrived at the stables with unexpected reinforcements. A distinguished man in his 60s carrying scientific equipment and a younger woman with a professional camera. "Elijah, this is Professor Martinez, head of equine behavioral studies at the university," Emma introduced them. "And this is Layla Jackson from the documentary program. They're here to help." Professor Martinez shook Elijah's hand warmly. "Emma has shown me the footage of your work with Thunderbolt. Remarkable rehabilitation technique, intuitive application of pressure-free joining methods we've been researching for years." His enthusiasm was genuine, his expertise evident. What Harrington is attempting, by contrast, represents outdated methodology that the scientific community has thoroughly discredited. "My grandfather respects credentials and public opinion," Emma explained. "Professor Martinez has agreed to observe and document both approaches, creating an official academic comparison." "And I'll be filming," Layla added, adjusting her camera. "Creating visual evidence for both academic purposes and, if necessary, legal protection." The professor moved closer to Thunderbolt's stall, maintaining a respectful distance. The Appaloosa watched him warily, but without the extreme agitation he showed with Harrington. "Fascinating adaptive responses," Martinez murmured, taking notes. "Clear discrimination between threatening and non-threatening humans, not generalized fear. That indicates remarkable psychological resilience despite the trauma history." Thunderbolt's ears flicked toward Elijah, seeking reassurance. The young man moved to the stall door, his presence immediately calming the horse. "The bond you've established is extraordinary," the professor continued. "In traditional training models, the horse submits to human dominance. Here, we're seeing voluntary cooperation based on mutual respect. Revolutionary for rehabilitation cases previously considered hopeless." Evening brought another unexpected ally. Willard Jenkins arrived with 5 other elders from the black community, men and women whose families had lived in Willow Creek for generations. "We've been talking," Jenkins said as they gathered near the paddock fence. "About your grandmother Josephine, about this land, about what's happening now with that horse." The others nodded in solemn agreement. "This isn't just about an animal. It's about something deeper. A wrong being righted, a circle being closed." Clara Washington, a church deacon in her 70s, stepped forward. "My mother worked in the big house when the Hendersons owned this land, before the Goldsteins bought it. She told stories about your grandmother. How white folks would bring their animals to her in secret when their own doctors couldn't help. They called her a witch when they feared her," added James Colton, his voice roughened by age and experience, "and a miracle worker when they needed her. Either way, they never gave her proper respect." Their presence and their stories strengthened Elijah's resolve. These elders carried the community's memory, understood the significance of what was happening beyond the immediate crisis with Thunderbolt. "What can we do?" Elijah asked. "We'll be witnesses," Jenkins replied simply. "When the time comes, we'll stand with you. Sometimes just being seen, really seen, is its own kind of power." The following day brought the confrontation they had been preparing for. Harrington arrived with his assistants and equipment for what he had announced would be the final conditioning session, where we break through once and for all. As they approached the stables, they found their path blocked by an unexpected gathering. Dr. Thompson stood at the front, medical bag in hand and stethoscope around his neck, the embodiment of professional authority. Beside him, Professor Martinez positioned scientific monitoring equipment while Emma held a tablet displaying relevant research. Layla's camera recorded everything. Behind them clustered several stable hands, including Sarah, Miguel, and Darnell, their presence a silent rebellion against business as usual. On the periphery, Jenkins and the community elders formed a dignified semicircle, their very presence transforming what might have been dismissed as a workplace disagreement into something with historical weight. "What the hell is this?" Harrington demanded, his hand tightening on the training whip at his side. "Professional oversight," Dr. Thompson replied calmly. "What you're doing constitutes animal abuse under state law. As a licensed veterinarian, I have an obligation to report it. The methods you're employing have been scientifically discredited," Professor Martinez added, gesturing to his equipment. "We're here to document the physiological stress responses these techniques provoke, evidence that will stand up in any court or regulatory hearing." Harrington's face flushed with anger. "This is private property. You can't interfere with contracted work." "Actually," Emma interjected, holding up her tablet, "Alabama's animal protection laws specifically state that professional intervention is permitted when there's reasonable suspicion of abuse, regardless of property considerations." A tense standoff ensued until Robert Goldstein himself appeared, alerted by the commotion. He surveyed the scene with barely concealed fury, particularly when he spotted community members from town on his property. "What is the meaning of this gathering?" he demanded, managing to make the last word sound like an accusation. "These people are interfering with proper training procedures," Harrington complained immediately. "We need to establish dominance before the auction, and they're preventing—" "What we're preventing is animal cruelty," Dr. Thompson interrupted firmly. "I've examined Thunderbolt and documented injuries consistent with abusive handling. As the attending veterinarian, I'm exercising my professional authority to halt these procedures." Goldstein's eyes narrowed, calculating the risks. The presence of the university professor, the camera, the respected local veterinarian, and the community elders had transformed a private business decision into a potential public relations disaster. "Perhaps," he said finally, his voice tight with controlled rage, "we should reconsider our approach temporarily." "These methods need to stop permanently," Emma insisted, standing straighter under her grandfather's glare. "They're not just cruel, they're counterproductive. The evidence is clear." "Evidence?" Goldstein scoffed, though there was uncertainty beneath his bluster. "All I see is interference in business practices." Professor Martinez stepped forward, offering his tablet. Comparative stress hormone levels under Harrington's methods versus Williams' approach. The data is unequivocal. He gestured toward Thunderbolt's stall. "That horse isn't responding to dominance training because his trauma history has fundamentally altered his neurological responses. Force escalates his defensive reactions, creating a dangerous cycle for both animal and handlers." The standoff lasted several more minutes, with Harrington growing increasingly agitated while Goldstein weighed his options. Finally, the farm owner raised his hand for silence. "Fine. Harrington's methods are suspended for now." His cold gaze fixed on Elijah. "But the auction proceeds as planned. You will demonstrate Thunderbolt's rehabilitation yourself in 3 days' time." The small crowd began to disperse, a sense of cautious victory in the air. But Goldstein wasn't finished. He pulled Elijah aside, his voice pitched for his ears alone. "You think you've won something here? You've only shifted the responsibility." His smile was shark-like. "You will present that horse at the auction. If he performs perfectly, I profit. If he injures anyone, The liability falls entirely on you." Elijah maintained steady eye contact, refusing to be intimidated. "I understand." "And if you refuse to present him," Goldstein continued, "consider yourself immediately terminated, with references that will ensure you never work with horses again in this state." After Goldstein stalked away, Emma approached Elijah, her expression troubled. "I heard what he said. He's trying to trap you. Either way, Thunderbolt still gets sold to the highest bidder." "One battle at a time," Elijah replied, though the weight of what lay ahead settled heavily on his shoulders. "Today we stop the abuse. Tomorrow we figure out how to save him permanently." That night, Elijah spent hours with Thunderbolt, working to repair the psychological damage Harrington's brief intervention had caused. The horse's trust had been shaken. He startled at sudden movements, his eyes tracking shadows with renewed suspicion. "I know, partner," Elijah murmured, keeping his movements slow and predictable. "People let you down again, but I'm still here." Gradually, Thunderbolt's breathing steadied, his massive head lowering as tension released from his powerful frame. By midnight, he had returned to accepting gentle touches along his neck, small victories in the ongoing battle for his trust. As Elijah finally prepared to leave, Sarah appeared at the stable entrance with a thermos of coffee and a worried expression. "You need to see this," she said, handing him her phone. On the screen was an email circulated to all staff. The auction schedule had been finalized, with Thunderbolt listed as the premier attraction. The Untamable Tamed, a demonstration of revolutionary training methods by Elijah Williams. "He's using you," Sarah said softly, "making you the face of this while he collects the profits." "I know," Elijah replied, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. "But it gives me 3 days with Thunderbolt without Harrington's interference. 3 days to figure something out." While Elijah shared the last of Sarah's coffee with her, Emma rushed into the stable, her expression animated with unexpected excitement. "Elijah, you won't believe this. Professor Martinez found something in the university archives, historical documents about this land that could change everything." Elijah stared at Emma, her words hanging in the air between them. "What kind of documents?" Emma pulled a large manila folder from her backpack, her hands trembling slightly with excitement. "Land grants. Professor Martinez found them in the university's historical archives. They were part of a research collection on Reconstruction-era policies." She spread several yellowed papers across an empty feed barrel. "These are copies, but the originals are preserved in the State Historical Society. The documents were official government decrees, their elaborate letterheads and formal language partially faded by time." Elijah leaned closer, his heart quickening as he recognized a familiar name among the beneficiaries. "Williams," he murmured, his finger tracing the elegant script. "Jeremiah Williams." Emma nodded eagerly. "According to these records, after the Civil War, this entire area, what's now the Goldstein Farm and surrounding properties, was allocated to 3 families of freed slaves under the Southern Homestead Act: the Williams, the Johnsons, and the Friedmans." Sarah, who had remained quietly beside them, gasped softly. "My grandmother's maiden name was Johnson." "This map," Emma continued, unfolding a delicate rendering of property boundaries, "shows the original divisions. The central hill where the main stables stand was Williams' land. Jenkins had mentioned this history, but seeing the official documentation, tangible proof that his ancestors had legally owned this very soil, sent a wave of emotion through Elijah that was almost physical in its intensity. "My grandfather said the land was stolen," he said quietly, "but I never imagined there would be actual records. Reconstruction-era land grants were systematically undermined after federal troops withdrew from the South," Professor Martinez explained, joining them with additional materials. "What began as legitimate ownership was eroded through a combination of violence, legal manipulation, and economic pressure." "How does this help Thunderbolt?" Sarah asked, bringing them back to the immediate crisis. "It might not, directly," Emma admitted, "but it changes the power dynamics. My grandfather values nothing more than his reputation and legal standing. If there's even a hint that the Goldstein claim to this land might be compromised..." We need to be careful, Elijah cautioned, thinking of Goldstein's ruthlessness. Pushing too hard could backfire on all of us. Agreed, Professor Martinez said. The auction is in 3 days. Our priority must be protecting Thunderbolt from being sold to another potentially abusive owner. These documents are leverage we hold in reserve. The following morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect Alabama summer day that belied the tension simmering beneath the surface at Goldstein Farm. Workers moved with unusual quietness, conversations hushed, everyone sensing the coming confrontation. Elijah spent the morning with Thunderbolt, focused on rebuilding the horse's confidence after Harrington's damaging sessions. The Appaloosa remained wary, his trust visibly shaken. When Elijah approached with the soft rope halter they'd been using successfully for weeks, Thunderbolt backed away, his ears flattening momentarily before recognition seemed to override his renewed fear. "I know, partner," Elijah murmured, standing motionless until the horse settled. "They hurt you again. Made you remember the bad times." Thunderbolt's nostrils flared, drawing in Elijah's familiar scent. The massive animal trembled slightly, caught between instinctive fear and the tentative trust they'd built. "I'm not them," Elijah continued, his voice a gentle current in the morning stillness. "Take your time. Remember who I am." For nearly 30 minutes, they remained in this delicate balance, Elijah motionless, speaking softly, while Thunderbolt processed his conflicting instincts. Finally, with exquisite caution, the horse took one step forward, then another, until his muzzle brushed against Elijah's outstretched hand. "There you are," Elijah whispered, relief flooding through him. "Welcome back, big man." Emma documented this reconciliation from a respectful distance, her camera capturing the subtle body language that spoke volumes about trauma, resilience, and the fragile nature of trust. "It's remarkable," she said later as they reviewed the footage with Professor Martinez. "You can actually see the moment when his cognitive processing overrides his traumatic response. His ears, his muscle tension, his respiratory rate. Everything shifts. The human-animal bond at its most elemental," Martinez agreed. "Not dominance or submission, but genuine choice-based relationship." By afternoon, Jenkins arrived with additional community members, more than the previous day, their numbers now including younger faces alongside the elders. "Word's spreading," Jenkins explained, his weathered face solemn. "People remember your grandmother, remember the stories about this land. They want to witness whatever happens next." Elijah felt the weight of their expectations, their hope. This was no longer just about one horse, but about reclaiming something larger: dignity, heritage, justice, long deferred. As the community members gathered near the paddocks, Robert Goldstein emerged from the main house, his face darkening at the sight of so many uninvited visitors on his property. "This is becoming a circus," he snapped at Emma when she approached to intercept him. "These people have no business here." "They're interested in Thunderbolt's rehabilitation," Emma replied smoothly. "Potential buyers, local horse enthusiasts, community members with historical connections to the area." Goldstein's gaze swept over the gathering, lingering on Jenkins and the other black elders with poorly concealed displeasure. "Historical connections? What are you talking about?" Emma hesitated, feeling the weight of the documents in her backpack. Now wasn't the time, not yet. "Just people who've lived in Willow Creek for generations. They remember when this farm was established." Her grandfather's eyes narrowed with suspicion, but his attention was diverted by the arrival of several expensive vehicles, early auction attendees coming to preview the stock. His demeanor transformed instantly, the practiced charm of a salesman replacing his irritation. "We'll discuss this later," he muttered to Emma, before striding off to greet the wealthy newcomers. That evening, with only 2 days remaining before the auction, Elijah, Emma, Jenkins, and the core allies gathered in the small church community room on the outskirts of town. The historical documents lay spread across a worn wooden table, their significance weighty despite their fragile appearance. "These grants establish clear legal ownership," Emma explained, having consulted with a law professor at the university. "Under recent Supreme Court precedents, There's growing recognition that land appropriation based on racial discrimination doesn't simply expire with time. "You're suggesting we could challenge the Goldstein ownership?" Dr. Thompson asked, his expression troubled. "That would be a lengthy, expensive legal battle." "Not necessarily challenging current ownership entirely," Emma clarified. "But establishing that portions of the property were wrongfully taken could create basis for partial restitution or compensation." Jenkins leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the land map with its carefully drawn boundaries. "This section here," he pointed to the eastern acreage, "includes the old cemetery where my grandparents and many of the original families are buried. Goldstein built storage sheds over part of it in the 90s. The desecration of ancestral resting places added another layer to the injustice, a tangible example of how history had been literally paved over. The auction is our immediate concern," Elijah reminded them, bringing the focus back to Thunderbolt. "Whatever legal action might be possible will take months or years. We have less than 48 hours to prevent Thunderbolt from being sold to someone who might destroy all the progress he's made." Professor Martinez nodded thoughtfully. "The historical documentation gives us leverage, certainly, but we need a strategy for the auction itself." "What if," Sarah suggested quietly from where she sat near the door, "we make sure potential buyers know exactly what they're getting? The trauma history, the specific needs, the fact that Thunderbolt only responds to Elijah's methods." "Ethical disclosure," Emma agreed, warming to the idea. "We could prepare information packets on trauma-informed care requirements, make it clear that conventional training will fail catastrophically, and demonstrate that dramatically at the presentation," Elijah added, a plan forming in his mind. "Show not just what Thunderbolt can do with me, but what happens with anyone else." By the time they left the church, night had fallen completely. Stars scattered across the Alabama sky like distant witnesses to their planning. Elijah felt the dual weight of responsibility and possibility. For Thunderbolt, for the land his ancestors had worked, for his own future that suddenly seemed connected to both in ways he couldn't have imagined weeks ago. The next morning brought a flurry of activity to Goldstein Farm. Workers erected the auction tent, set up seating, and prepared display areas for the catalog of horses to be sold. Elijah noticed several unfamiliar men in expensive suits examining the facilities with Robert Goldstein, their manner suggesting wealth and influence beyond local circles. "Buyers from Kentucky and Virginia," Emma explained when she joined him near the paddocks. "The serious collectors always come early to assess the merchandise before auction day." "Merchandise," Elijah repeated, the word bitter on his tongue. "That's all they are to men like that." "Not to everyone," Emma countered gently. "There are ethical owners too, people who understand what these animals need." They watched as Goldstein led his guests toward the main stables, their path taking them directly to Thunderbolt's stall. Elijah tensed, immediately alert to the potential stress this would cause after their careful work rebuilding the horse's confidence. "We should be there," he said, already moving in their direction. When they reached the stables, they found the men standing at a careful distance from Thunderbolt's stall, the Appaloosa visibly agitated by the presence of strangers. "Magnificent animal," one of the visitors commented, his practiced eye assessing Thunderbolt's conformation despite the horse's distress. "Shame about the temperament issues, which have been successfully addressed," Goldstein asserted smoothly. "Our specialist will demonstrate the transformation at tomorrow's event. From unmanageable to responsive in just 1 month, a testament to our innovative methods." Elijah bristled at the appropriation of his work, the way Goldstein claimed credit for progress, achieved through patience and understanding, rather than the innovative methods he'd originally insisted on. When the visitors moved on to inspect other horses, Elijah approached Thunderbolt's stall. The Appaloosa was pacing anxiously, his earlier calm shattered by the intrusion of unfamiliar men whose very posture and scent likely reminded him of previous owners and handlers. "Easy, big man," Elijah murmured, maintaining a respectful distance until Thunderbolt acknowledged his presence. "Just more humans who don't understand." The horse's agitation gradually subsided as Elijah remained steadfast, his voice a constant gentle current amid the chaos of auction preparations. By late afternoon, Thunderbolt had settled enough to accept an apple from Elijah's hand, though his ears remained alert to every unfamiliar sound from outside the stables. As dusk approached, Emma found Elijah still with Thunderbolt, sitting on an overturned bucket while softly playing his banjo, a melody that seemed to soothe both man and horse. "The professor and I have been talking," she said when he finished the song. "About tomorrow, about what happens after the demonstration, regardless of how it goes." Elijah set the banjo aside, giving her his full attention. "We've prepared documentation packages for every registered buyer," Emma continued. "Scientific analysis of Thunderbolt's condition, veterinary reports on his specific needs, liability warnings about potential regression with conventional methods." She hesitated. "It might discourage some buyers, but not all. The truly wealthy ones might see his rehabilitation as a challenge, a trophy. So we delay, not prevent," Elijah concluded, the reality settling heavily on his shoulders. "Unless—" Emma glanced toward the farm office, where lights still burned despite the late hour. "Unless we use the historical documents. Force my grandfather to reconsider the entire auction." The system of sound from the farm crackled with the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 50th Annual Goldstein Premium Horse Auction. In 15 minutes, we will present our main attraction, the untamable Thunderbolt, now domesticated through the revolutionary method of Mr. Williams." And Elijah felt the weight of the moment. Everything that had happened in his life seemed to lead him to this arena, to this day, to this impossible challenge. Dawn broke over the Goldstein farm, painting the auction grounds in hues of amber and gold. The announcement still echoed in Elijah's ears as he stood beside Thunderbolt's stall, his hand resting lightly on the door. The morning air hummed with activity, workers making final preparations, early arrivals inspecting horses, the distant sound of vehicles crunching over gravel as more spectators arrived for the day's main event. "Ready, partner?" Elijah murmured, though the question was as much for himself as for the horse. Thunderbolt's ears flicked forward at the sound of his voice, dark eyes holding Elijah's gaze with an intensity that transcended simple animal awareness. After weeks of patient trust-building, Elijah had come to recognize the subtle shifts in the Appaloosa's expression, the almost imperceptible relaxation around his eyes when he felt safe, the slight dilation of his nostrils when uncertain. This morning, Thunderbolt was alert but calm, his massive body still carrying the scars of past abuse, but standing without the constant trembling that had marked their early encounters. Whatever happened today, this transformation alone was victory enough. An animal once consumed by terror now capable of trust, however tentative. Emma appeared at the stable entrance, her face drawn with tension despite her attempt at a reassuring smile. "The arena's almost full," she reported. "Grandfather's invited every wealthy horse owner in 3 states. "And our people?" Elijah asked quietly. "All in position. Dr. Thompson is seated near the judge's stand. Professor Martinez has his monitoring equipment set up. Jenkins and the community elders have front-row seats on the east side." She hesitated. "Sarah smuggled your banjo under the announcer's platform, just in case." Elijah nodded, drawing comfort from this network of unlikely allies who had coalesced around Thunderbolt's cause. "And the documents?" Emma patted her satchel. "Ready if needed, though I'm hoping we won't have to use them yet. Let's see how the demonstration goes first." The preparation area behind the main arena buzzed with pre-auction energy. Handlers groomed their charges to gleaming perfection. Owners conferred in hushed tones about reserve prices and potential buyers, and the auctioneer tested his microphone with practiced patter. Robert Goldstein moved through the chaos like a conductor, immaculate in an expensive suit, greeting valued clients with calculated warmth while directing staff with sharp efficiency. His smile faltered momentarily when he spotted Elijah leading Thunderbolt toward the preparation area, the horse following with remarkable calmness considering the stimulation around them. "There's my star attraction," Goldstein declared, approaching with careful steps. "I trust you're ready to demonstrate the miracle you've accomplished." "We're ready," Elijah replied simply. one hand resting lightly on Thunderbolt's neck. The possessive pronoun was deliberate, a small assertion of the partnership that had formed between man and horse. Goldstein's eyes narrowed slightly at the choice of words. Remember our agreement. A flawless demonstration brings you a generous bonus. Any incidents will be entirely your responsibility. Before Elijah could respond, the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The 50th annual Goldstein Premium Horse Auction will begin in 5 minutes, opening with our special demonstration. The arena had been transformed for the occasion. Banners bearing the Goldstein Farm logo fluttered from every post, and fresh white sand covered the ground. Bleachers arranged in a horseshoe formation were filled nearly to capacity with an audience that reflected the social hierarchy of the region. Wealthy buyers in front rows, local horse enthusiasts behind them, and community members, primarily Black and Latino, clustered together on the eastern edge. Emma had secured a position near the announcer's stand, ostensibly to assist with the auction catalog, but positioned to intervene if necessary. Dr. Thompson sat with notepad ready, while Professor Martinez monitored equipment that would record Thunderbolt's vital signs and stress indicators throughout the demonstration. As Elijah prepared to enter the arena, Buck Harrington approached, his expression a mixture of professional interest and lingering resentment. "Quite a crowd you've drawn," the trainer commented, eyeing Thunderbolt with calculating assessment. "Let's hope your miracle method holds up under pressure." "It's not a method," Elijah replied quietly. "It's a relationship." Harrington scoffed, but before he could respond, the announcer called for silence. "Distinguished guests, welcome to today's highlight presentation. As many of you know, Thunderbolt, once the terror of the rodeo circuit, came to Goldstein Farm with a reputation for unmanageable aggression. 3 professional handlers hospitalized, deemed beyond rehabilitation." The announcer paused dramatically. "Until now, please welcome to the arena Elijah Williams and the transformed Thunderbolt." A spotlight swung to the entrance gate as Elijah led Thunderbolt into the arena. The contrast between them was immediately striking. Elijah in simple work clothes rather than the elaborate Western wear typical of such events. Thunderbolt without the expected show tack or training equipment, just a simple halter with a loose lead rope draped over his powerful neck. A murmur rippled through the audience. This was not the polished spectacle they had anticipated. Instead of the dramatic entrance of a subjugated animal, they witnessed something far more subtle. A man and horse moving in synchrony, their steps matched in rhythm that suggested partnership rather than control. Robert Goldstein shifted uncomfortably in his seat at the judges' table, already sensing that the demonstration was veering from his expectations. He'd envisioned a showcase of dominance, the wild beast tamed through superior human will, that would command top dollar from buyers who valued submission in their investments. Instead, Elijah stopped in the center of the arena and removed even the minimal halter from Thunderbolt's head. The horse stood perfectly still, watching Elijah with alert attention, but making no move to flee despite being surrounded by hundreds of strangers in an unfamiliar environment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elijah began, his voice surprisingly steady despite never having addressed such a crowd before. "What you've come to see today isn't a show of dominance, but a lesson about respect and mutual trust." He moved several steps away from Thunderbolt, leaving the horse completely free in the arena. The audience held its collective breath, many expecting the animal to bolt or attack now that restraint had been removed. "This magnificent being you see before you wasn't tamed by me," Elijah continued, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed arena. "He chose to trust me after I understood his suffering. Today, he will choose again." Silence descended as Thunderbolt remained motionless, processing his newfound freedom. His ears swiveled, taking in the unfamiliar sounds of the crowd. His nostrils flared, sampling the air thick with human scent. For several heartbeats, the outcome hung in perfect balance. Would fear override the fragile trust they had built? Then, with deliberate grace that drew gasps from the audience, Thunderbolt walked forward and positioned himself beside Elijah, their shoulders nearly touching. The choice, made freely by a being who had every reason to distrust humans, was more powerful than any trained performance could have been. From his seat at the judges' table, Robert Goldstein scowled, realizing the demonstration was not showcasing marketable obedience, but something far less commodifiable, genuine connection. He quickly signaled to two handlers stationed at the arena entrance, who moved forward with ropes and restraints, intent on regaining control of the situation. "We'll take it from here," one called to Elijah, approaching with a catch rope. "Mr. Goldstein wants to demonstrate proper handling techniques for the buyers." The effect on Thunderbolt was immediate and dramatic. At the sight of the restraints and the aggressive posture of the approaching men, his body transformed, muscles tensing, head rising, nostrils flaring in recognition of threat. The peaceful animal from moments before vanished, replaced by the defensive creature shaped by years of abuse. "Stop!" Emma shouted, rising from her seat near the announcer's stand. "Can't you see what's happening? You're triggering his trauma response." The handlers hesitated, looking toward Goldstein for direction. In that moment of uncertainty, Thunderbolt reared powerfully, forelegs pawing the air in a display that sent the handlers scrambling backward. Panic rippled through the audience. Some spectators stood to flee, others pressed forward for a better view of the unfolding drama. Through it all, Elijah remained calm, making no move to restrain or control Thunderbolt. "This is what happens when you try to dominate instead of understand," he called out, his voice cutting through the growing chaos. "This isn't a behavioral problem. It's a response to trauma." As if to punctuate his point, Thunderbolt returned to all fours and, instead of fleeing or attacking, moved closer to Elijah, seeking the safety of his presence amidst the chaos. The juxtaposition was stark and undeniable: aggression toward those who approached with control, trust toward the one who offered respect. Emma seized the moment, stepping into the arena with microphone in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're witnessing a breakthrough in equine rehabilitation. This isn't just a trained horse. It's a being making conscious choices based on past experience and present treatment." The demonstration had clearly veered far from Goldstein's intended showcase, but the audience was captivated by the unscripted drama unfolding before them. Professor Martinez had moved to the arena edge, his monitoring equipment displaying Thunderbolt's vital signs on a tablet he held toward the crowd. "Look at these readings," he called out, his academic authority lending weight to the moment. Heart rate stable when with Mr. Williams, spiking dramatically when approached with traditional control methods. This is scientific validation of trauma-informed rehabilitation. Robert Goldstein, realizing he was losing control of his own auction, strode into the arena. "Enough of this circus," he snapped. "Williams, get that animal under control and proceed with the demonstration as planned." But before Elijah could respond, something extraordinary happened. Thunderbolt, agitated by the continuing tension, began to paw at the ground of the arena, not in the typical nervous gesture of an anxious horse, but with focused, deliberate movements in one specific spot. "He's digging," someone called from the audience. "Look at that." Indeed, Thunderbolt's powerful hooves were excavating the arena sand with surprising precision, clearly searching for something beneath the surface. As the audience watched in bewildered fascination, his hoof struck something solid, producing a distinctive metallic sound that carried across the now silent arena. "What in heaven's name?" Goldstein muttered, momentarily forgetting his anger as curiosity overtook him. Elijah approached cautiously, kneeling beside the hole Thunderbolt had created. Reaching down, his fingers connected with something solid, a metal object partially buried beneath the arena floor. With careful movements, he brushed away the remaining sand to reveal a tarnished metal box, roughly the size of a large book, its surface corroded by decades underground. "He found something," voices called from the audience as Elijah lifted the box from its resting place. The container was surprisingly heavy, its lid sealed by time and elements. Working carefully, Elijah managed to pry it open, revealing contents protected by layers of waxed cloth, papers and photographs preserved despite their long burial. Willard Jenkins moved with surprising speed for a man his age, crossing from his seat to the arena with urgent purpose. Kneeling beside Elijah, he examined the documents with trembling hands, his expression transforming from curiosity to awe. "My God," he whispered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "These are the original deeds, the ones my grandfather always said were stolen." The documents, yellowed but legible, bore official seals and signatures, land grants and property deeds dating to the Reconstruction era, detailing the legal allocation of the very ground on which they now stood to 3 families of freed slaves following the Civil War. Among the photographs was one that caused Elijah's breath to catch. A young family posed proudly before a simple cabin, the man wearing around his neck a medallion identical to the one Elijah had discovered in his grandfather's banjo. "Williams," Jenkins read from one of the documents, his voice carrying in the hushed arena. "Jeremiah Williams and family. Elijah, this was your great-great-grandfather. This land, part of it legally belonged to your family." The impact of the revelation rippled through the arena like a physical wave. Journalists present for the auction began photographing frantically, documenting what had suddenly transformed from a horse demonstration to a historical discovery with profound implications. Robert Goldstein, his face drained of color, attempted to dismiss the significance. "Old papers don't change current ownership," he declared, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "This property was legally purchased by me 20 years ago." Emma stepped forward, her law studies giving weight to her words. "Actually, grandfather, misappropriation of land through fraudulent means doesn't expire in cases of documented racial exploitation. Recent Supreme Court precedent in similar Mississippi cases makes that clear. Under the gaze of hundreds of witnesses, including journalists, academics, and community members whose own family histories were intertwined with the land, the demonstration had become something far more significant than anyone had anticipated. What began as Thunderbolt's moment had transformed into a reckoning with buried history, both literal and figurative. And throughout the commotion, Thunderbolt remained calmly beside Elijah, as if understanding that he had unearthed not just hidden documents, but a truth that connected both their fates in ways no one could have foreseen. The arena fell silent as the implications of Jenkins's words settled over the crowd. The documents, preserved for decades in their metal sanctuary beneath the earth, lay spread across Elijah's lap, irrefutable evidence of a history deliberately buried. Thunderbolt stood beside him, unnaturally calm amid the tension, as if understanding the magnitude of what he had uncovered with his powerful hooves. Robert Goldstein recovered first, his businessman's instincts kicking in as he assessed the threat to his empire. "These papers are interesting historical artifacts," he announced, his voice projecting confident dismissal. "But they have no bearing on current ownership. This property was purchased through proper legal channels, with clear title and full documentation." But the crowd had already sensed blood in the water. Whispers rippled through the bleachers as phones captured images of the documents, the story already spreading beyond the confines of the arena. Jenkins handled the brittle papers with reverent care, his weathered fingers tracing the elegant script. "My father told me about these deeds. Said they were stolen from the community church during a night raid in 1920. Men in hoods took them, burned the church for good measure." His voice carried the weight of generations. "Said without these papers we had no proof the land was ever ours." A reporter from the Birmingham News pushed forward, notebook in hand. "Sir, are you saying this land was illegally taken from black landowners after Reconstruction?" "Not just taken," Jenkins replied, his dignity commanding attention. "Stolen through terror and legal manipulation after federal troops withdrew from the South." Emma stepped forward, her legal training evident in her precise language. "These documents establish that 3 families, the Williams, Johnsons, and Friedmans, were the legitimate owners of this property through federal land grants signed during Reconstruction. The historical record shows a pattern of violent dispossession throughout the region during the post-Reconstruction period." "This is absurd," Goldstein sputtered, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "Ancient history has no bearing on current property rights." "Actually," Emma continued, addressing the crowd rather than her grandfather, "the Supreme Court ruled just last year in Simmons v. Caldwell County that land appropriation based on racial intimidation and fraudulent legal maneuvers does not establish legitimate title, regardless of subsequent transfers. She paused, letting her words sink in. There is no statute of limitations on racially motivated property theft. Professor Martinez had joined them in the center of the arena, his academic authority adding weight to the unfolding drama. These documents appear consistent with Freedmen's Bureau records I've studied. The pattern of allocation, the signatures, the official seals, all consistent with legitimate Reconstruction-era land grants. As the implications rippled through the arena, Elijah remained centered in the eye of the storm, one hand resting on Thunderbolt's neck. The horse's calm presence anchored him amidst the chaos, their connection transcending the human drama unfolding around them. One of the photographs had slipped from the packet, landing face up on the arena sand. Elijah picked it up carefully, studying the image of a proud black family standing before a simple cabin. The man, tall, dignified despite his worn clothing, wore a medallion identical to the one Elijah carried in his pocket. Without thinking, Elijah removed his own medallion, holding it alongside the photograph. "My God," Jenkins breathed. "That's the Williams family token, passed down through generations." Emma leaned closer, her eyes widening. The cabin in that photo, it stood exactly where our main stable is now. You can see the same hill formation in the background. Journalists pushed forward, cameras flashing as they captured the moment. Elijah holding his ancestral medallion alongside the photograph, the physical evidence of his connection to this land undeniable. Robert Goldstein attempted to regain control, signaling security to clear the arena. "This auction will continue as scheduled," he announced, his voice strained. "These historical curiosities can be addressed through proper legal channels at another time." But the damage was done. Buyers were already consulting with their attorneys by phone, unwilling to risk purchasing property with potentially compromised title. The crowd's attention had shifted entirely from horses to history, from commerce to justice. In the weeks that followed, the story exploded beyond Willow Creek. National media descended on the small Alabama town, drawn by the compelling narrative of buried documents, hidden history, and the extraordinary horse who had unearthed them. Historians from universities across the country authenticated the documents, confirming their legitimacy and significance. Elijah found himself at the center of a legal and historical storm. Attorneys from the Equal Justice Initiative offered pro bono representation to the descendants of the three original families, while academics documented similar cases of land appropriation throughout the South. "This case has the potential to establish precedent," explained Miranda Chen, the lead attorney, during a meeting in the community church where descendants of the Williams, Johnson, and Freedman families had gathered. The combination of clear documentary evidence, the recent Supreme Court ruling, and the public attention creates a unique opportunity for restorative justice. Throughout the legal proceedings, Elijah maintained his daily routine with Thunderbolt. The Appaloosa had become something of a celebrity himself, with visitors often gathering at the paddock fence hoping to glimpse the history horse, as local children had dubbed him. "He doesn't understand why everyone's staring," Elijah explained to Emma one evening as they watched Thunderbolt graze peacefully. "But he senses something has changed. Animals always know when energy shifts." Emma nodded, watching the horse with newfound appreciation. "It's like he was meant to find those documents. Of all the places in that arena, he chose that exact spot to dig." "Jenkins says there's no such thing as coincidence when it comes to healing old wounds," Elijah replied softly. "Says sometimes justice finds its own path." 3 months after the auction day revelation, the county court scheduled the first hearing in what had become known locally as the Freedom Land case. The courthouse square overflowed with supporters, journalists, and curious onlookers. Robert Goldstein arrived with a team of expensive attorneys, their confidence evident in their tailored suits and leather briefcases. Inside the packed courtroom, Judge Eleanor Watkins, a stern woman in her 60s who had served on the county bench for over 20 years, called the proceedings to order. "This court recognizes the historical significance and complexity of the case before us," she began. "We will proceed methodically, with full respect for both established property law and the emerging jurisprudence regarding historical injustices." The legal battle unfolded over 6 grueling days. Goldstein's attorneys argued that subsequent property transfers had cleansed any initial irregularities, that current property law protected good faith purchasers regardless of historical contexts, and that opening the door to such claims would create chaos in the real estate market. The plaintiff's team countered with expert testimony from historians documenting the systematic dispossession of black landowners during the late 19th century, forensic analysis confirming the authenticity of the recovered documents, and precedent from recent Supreme Court decisions acknowledging that property transfers based on racially motivated intimidation never established legitimate title. Throughout it all, Elijah sat quietly in the front row, the medallion around his neck a tangible connection to Jeremiah Williams, whose dignified face stared back from the century-old photograph now entered as Exhibit A. On the final day, as closing arguments concluded, Judge Watkins removed her glasses and addressed the packed courtroom. "This case presents us with an opportunity to acknowledge that our legal system has not always delivered justice equally," she stated, her voice measured but resolute. "When laws themselves were manipulated to strip rightful owners of their property based on race, subsequent transfers do not automatically sanitize the original theft." She paused, surveying the rapt audience before continuing. "Having considered all evidence and arguments, this court finds that the land grants issued to the Williams, Johnson, and Friedman families during Reconstruction established legitimate ownership. The subsequent transfers through intimidation and fraudulent means did not create valid title." A collective intake of breath filled the courtroom as the implications became clear. "Therefore," Judge Watkins continued, "this court orders that 30% of the current Goldstein property, specifically the eastern section encompassing the original homesteads and cemetery, be returned to the legitimate heirs of the original grantees. The remaining property, acquired through subsequent expansions, remains with the current title holder." The courtroom erupted in controlled chaos, journalists rushing for the exits to break the story, attorneys conferring urgently with their clients, community members embracing with tears streaming down their faces. Robert Goldstein, his face ashen, conferred briefly with his legal team before approaching Elijah. For a moment, the two men regarded each other in silence, the wealthy landowner and the stable hand, their fates intertwined by buried history and a horse's intuition. "My attorneys advise appealing," Goldstein said finally, his voice subdued. "They say the ruling sets a dangerous precedent." "It does," Elijah agreed quietly, "just not the kind they mean." In the end, facing mounting investigations into other questionable land acquisitions and possible tax improprieties revealed during discovery, Robert Goldstein opted for a comprehensive settlement rather than a protracted legal battle. He sold his remaining Alabama holdings and returned to Texas, leaving behind the empire he had built on forgotten foundations. 6 months after Thunderbolt had pawed through arena sand to uncover buried truth, Elijah stood on the eastern ridge of what had once been Goldstein Farm, now legally recognized as Williams Johnson Friedman Heritage Land. The morning sun cast long shadows across fields where his ancestors had once cultivated crops, raised families, and built dreams of post-slavery freedom. Thunderbolt grazed nearby, his coat gleaming with health, the scars of his past abuse still visible but fading gradually with time and care. Like the land itself, he carried his history on his body, not erased, but healing. "What will you do with your portion?" Emma asked, joining Elijah on the hillside. She had resigned from her university position to help establish the legal framework for the community trust now managing the property. "The stables," Elijah replied without hesitation. "Transform them into a rehabilitation center for traumatized horses, a place where they can heal at their own pace, without force or fear." He patted the pocket where he kept the proposal Dr. Thompson had helped him draft. "There's funding available for innovative equine therapy programs." Emma smiled, watching Thunderbolt pause in his grazing to acknowledge a butterfly landing momentarily on his withers. "My grandfather never understood the value of what he had here. He saw land as something to be owned and exploited, not a living connection to the past and future." In the months that followed, the eastern section of the former Goldstein Farm underwent a transformation. The main stables were renovated with designs prioritizing natural light and open spaces. The surrounding paddocks were expanded, allowing horses more freedom of movement. A small museum was established in what had been the farm office, documenting both the land's history and innovative approaches to equine rehabilitation. On a warm spring morning, Elijah stood before a gathered crowd of community members, veterinary students, and media representatives for the official opening of what was now called Thunderbolt Sanctuary, Equine Rehabilitation, and African American Heritage Center. The wooden sign, hand-carved by Jenkins's grandson, featured an image of a running horse alongside symbols from the Williams family medallion. "This place exists because a horse refused to give up," Elijah told the assembled guests, "and because people refuse to forget." He glanced at Thunderbolt, now contentedly greeting visitors at the paddock fence, his former fear of strangers gradually replaced by cautious curiosity. Some scars never completely disappear, but they can become marks of survival rather than suffering. Later that afternoon, as the last visitors departed, Elijah and Thunderbolt walked the perimeter of the property, following the same path that Jeremiah Williams must have walked over a century earlier. When they reached the restored family cemetery on the eastern edge, now properly fenced and marked with new headstones, Elijah removed the medallion from around his neck, studying its ancient engravings in the fading light. "My great-grandmother would say this isn't coincidence," Jenkins remarked, joining Elijah by the cemetery gate. "Finding that medallion in your grandfather's banjo, Thunderbolt digging up those papers. Some would call it fate, others divine justice." The old man's eyes crinkled with emotion as he gazed across the land. "But you and this horse are here for a purpose greater than any of us can fully comprehend right now." 1 year later, the sunrise painted the eastern sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson as Elijah stood on the porch of the newly constructed visitor center. The renovated property, once the epicenter of Goldstein's equestrian empire, had transformed into something entirely different, a sanctuary where both horses and humans could heal from their respective traumas. The sign at the entrance, crafted from reclaimed barn wood, proudly displayed Thunderbolt Sanctuary, Center for Equine Recovery and African American Heritage Preservation. The transformation had been remarkable. Where once stood imposing stables designed to showcase expensive horseflesh for wealthy buyers, now stretched a thoughtfully designed complex of paddocks, rehabilitation areas, and educational spaces. The architecture honored both function and history. The main stable had been rebuilt with natural lighting and open spaces that reduced stress for traumatized animals, while incorporating design elements from the original freedmen's cabins that once dotted this land. Elijah watched as the first light touched Thunderbolt's coat, the Appaloosa grazing peacefully in the nearest paddock. The horse had become the living symbol of the sanctuary, his journey from terrified aggression to confident trust mirroring the reclamation of the land itself. His scars remained visible, lighter streaks across his flanks where whips and spurs had once drawn blood, but they no longer defined him. Like the land, he carried his history without being imprisoned by it. "Morning, partner," Elijah called softly. Thunderbolt's head lifted immediately, ears pricked forward in recognition. With unhurried dignity, the horse abandoned his grazing to approach the fence, greeting Elijah with a gentle nudge against his outstretched hand. Emma emerged from the educational center, clipboard in hand, her practical work clothes a far cry from the polished appearance she'd maintained during her grandfather's reign. "First group arrives at 9, she announced, joining Elijah at the fence. 15 teenagers from the Birmingham Youth Center. Most have been through the foster system." "Thunderbolt's ready," Elijah replied, watching the horse return to his grazing with the relaxed posture that had once seemed impossible. "He always seems to know which kids need him most." The sanctuary had developed a reputation for its innovative programs combining equine therapy with historical education. Traumatized horses worked with traumatized youth, creating a healing space where mutual understanding transcended verbal limitations. What had begun as Elijah's vision had expanded through Emma's organizational skills and the community's enthusiastic support. Dr. Thompson arrived as they were setting up, his veterinary expertise now devoted full time to the sanctuary after closing his private practice. "How's our new arrival settling in?" he asked, referring to a severely neglected mare rescued from an abandoned property the previous week. "Better this morning," Elijah reported. "She took water from my hand for the first time. Still won't let anyone behind her, though." Consistent progress, no matter how small, is what matters, Dr. Thompson affirmed, the philosophy that had become the sanctuary's unofficial motto. By mid-morning, the property bustled with activity. The teenagers from Birmingham moved cautiously through the facility, their urban wariness gradually softening as they encountered horses with stories that resonated with their own experiences of abandonment and mistreatment. Elijah observed a particular girl, thin, withdrawn, with eyes that darted constantly as if mapping escape routes, hovering at the edge of the group. He recognized the body language of someone conditioned to expect danger from every direction. Without drawing attention to her, he guided the group toward Thunderbolt's paddock. "This is our founder," he explained, gesturing to the Appaloosa who watched the newcomers with alert interest. When Thunderbolt came here, he was so traumatized he would attack anyone who approached him. 3 professional handlers had been hospitalized trying to work with him. The teenagers' attention sharpened, recognizing a story that paralleled their own defensive behaviors. "What changed him?" asked a tall boy with intricate braids and a skeptical expression. "Not what, who," Elijah corrected gently. "He changed himself when he found someone who understood that his aggression wasn't meanness, it was protection." He paused, letting the concept sink in. "The horses here are the best therapists we have. They respond to who you really are, not who you pretend to be." The withdrawn girl had drifted closer to the fence, her attention fixed on Thunderbolt. The horse, with the uncanny sensitivity that still amazed even Elijah, had noticed her too. Slowly, deliberately, he approached her section of the fence, lowering his massive head to her level. "He wants to say hello," Elijah suggested quietly. "If you're comfortable, you can offer your hand, palm up so he can smell you." The girl hesitated, looking from Elijah to the horse with uncertainty. "What if he doesn't like me?" "Then he'll let you know by moving away," Elijah explained. "Horses are honest, they don't pretend. That's why we can learn so much from them." With trembling fingers, the girl extended her hand. Thunderbolt's velvet muzzle brushed against her palm in a gentle greeting that drew a startled gasp from her, followed by the first genuine smile they'd seen on her face. "How did you know he'd choose me?" she asked later, after spending nearly an hour simply standing beside Thunderbolt while the others participated in more structured activities. "I didn't," Elijah admitted. "He did. Horses recognize kindred spirits, other beings who've learned to be cautious because the world hasn't always been kind." As the sanctuary's reputation grew, so did the complexity of cases they accepted. Horses that other facilities deemed dangerous or untrainable found their way to Thunderbolt Sanctuary, where Elijah's methods challenged conventional wisdom about rehabilitation timeframes and techniques. "The core principle is simple," he explained to a group of veterinary students from Emma's former university program, now regular interns at the sanctuary. "We don't impose arbitrary deadlines for progress. Each animal heals at its own pace, and our job is to create space for that healing, not force it into our schedule." The integration of the land's African American history into the sanctuary's mission had proven equally important. Willard Jenkins served as the primary guide for the small but powerful museum established in the converted farmhouse. Artifacts, photographs, and oral histories documented both the original black landowners' accomplishments and the systematic theft that had nearly erased their legacy. "This medallion," Jenkins explained to visitors, indicating the Williams family token now displayed prominently in a custom case. "Traveled from Africa during the Middle Passage, survived plantation slavery, and was passed down through generations as a reminder of who we were before chains and who we could be again." The sanctuary's annual community celebration fell on the anniversary of the court ruling that had returned the land to its rightful heirs. Hundreds gathered for music, food, and fellowship on grounds that had once been forbidden to the descendants of those who had first worked it. Sarah, now the sanctuary's hospitality director, coordinated the international visitors who increasingly sought out Thunderbolt Sanctuary as a model for similar projects. "We have groups from 5 countries this month alone," she told Elijah as they watched the celebration unfold. "Your methods are changing how people think about trauma recovery, for animals and humans." The highlight of the evening was always the Freedom Run, Thunderbolt and Elijah demonstrating their bond through a choreographed display that involved no restraints or commands, just mutual understanding and choice. As the setting sun cast long shadows across fields once worked by enslaved ancestors, horse and man moved in harmony that transcended traditional boundaries between species. A National Geographic photographer captured the moment, Thunderbolt running at full extension beside Elijah, their silhouettes framed against the sunset over ancestral land. The image would later appear on the magazine's cover for a special issue on healing and historical justice, becoming an iconic representation of reconciliation across multiple dimensions. That night, after the visitors had departed, Elijah sat on the porch of his small cabin, built on the exact spot where Jeremiah Williams' home had once stood. The medallion, normally displayed in the museum during the day, rested in his palm, its engraving still visible after centuries of handling by generations of his family. Emma joined him, offering coffee as they watched fireflies emerge across the darkening fields. "I was thinking about my grandfather today," she admitted, "how he never understood what he really had here." "Some people can only value what they can own or sell," Elijah replied. "They miss the deeper connections." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a small group, a nervous father and his 12-year-old daughter, who waited hesitantly at the edge of the property. "I'm sorry to bother you after hours," the man began, "but my daughter Lily hasn't spoken since her mother died last year. Her therapist suggested—" He trailed off, uncertain. "That perhaps horses might reach her when words fail." Elijah finished for him, recognizing the desperation in the father's eyes. He had seen it countless times, the last resort hope that brought people to their gates when conventional approaches fell short. Lily stood slightly apart from her father, her posture rigid with the effort of containing emotions too complex for her young psyche to process. Without a word, Elijah extended his hand to her, not demanding, merely offering. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her small hand in his. Together they walked to the special paddock where Thunderbolt and a gentle rescue pony named Starlight were enjoying the cool evening air. "These horses understand loss," Elijah explained quietly. "They don't need you to explain your feelings with words. They already know." Watching from the porch, Emma witnessed the scene that had played out countless times, yet never lost its power. The moment when a traumatized child encountered a being that offered understanding without demands. Lily's rigid posture gradually softened as she stood in silence beside the pony, something unspoken passing between them. "It's like watching emotional alchemy," she murmured to Sarah, who had joined them. "Every time I see it, I still can't quite believe the transformation." "That's because Elijah doesn't just work with horses," Sarah replied. "He created a place where everyone belongs exactly as they are, broken pieces and all." The following morning, as dawn broke over the sanctuary, Elijah and Thunderbolt completed their daily ritual, a quiet run through the misty fields, communion without constraints. Returning to the main paddock, Elijah watched a new group of nervous children arrive for their first visit, their foster parents hovering anxiously nearby. A small boy separated from the group, drawn to the fence where Elijah stood with Thunderbolt. His eyes held the wary assessment that came from too many broken promises, too many sudden transitions. "Is it true these horses were hurt before they came here?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Yes," Elijah answered honestly, "but they found safety here, a place to heal." The boy studied Thunderbolt, noting the scars still visible beneath his gleaming coat. "Do they ever get completely better?" Elijah considered the question seriously, recognizing its deeper significance. "Their bodies heal," he explained, resting his hand on Thunderbolt's neck. "The scars fade but don't disappear completely. What changes most is inside. They learn to trust again." to connect. They remember the pain, but it doesn't control them anymore. He knelt to the child's level, meeting his eyes directly. The most important thing we discovered here is that being broken doesn't mean being worthless. Sometimes our broken places are where the most important healing happens, not just for ourselves, but for others who need to see that survival is possible. The boy absorbed this, his expression thoughtful beyond his years. Thunderbolt, with his uncanny sensitivity to human emotion, gently extended his muzzle toward the child in greeting. "Here, you're safe," Elijah told the boy, echoing the words he himself had needed to hear years ago. "Here, you belong." On the modest plaque at the sanctuary entrance, visitors from across the country read the words that captured the essence of the extraordinary journey of man and animal. Where the freedom of one ends, the other's begins. Here, both meet.